4:03. I think we can let people roll in, but we could probably start the meeting. So we're going to start with the roll call.
Okay. I will take roll.
Great. Phil, you might need to mute yourself because I'm not sure if it's you that we're getting feedback from. If everyone else can just mute themselves, that'd be great.
Okay. Gregory Braille.
I'm here.
Phil Burton.
Here.
Tony Carrasco.
He's here.
Here.
Okay. In Young Cho. Not yet. Okay. Larry Klein.
Here.
Nadia Nayak.
Here.
Keith Reckdahl.
Here.
David Shen.
Here.
Carrie Templeton.
Here.
Okay.
Great. Awesome. So I think we have staff update. I'm not sure that there is a staff update, but we just left that on the calendar just to double check with everybody. Philip or Ripon, is there anything?
Thank you. I don't think we have any staff update today.
Okay.
Unless Ripon, do you have anything?
Not really. Looking forward to your report.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. Again, to add on to what Tony said earlier, though, I do want to thank you all for your continued hard work on this.
Yes. Thank you guys for hanging in there as we keep on keeping on. Okay. So without any staff updates, I think we can move to oral communication. So since we have finished our deliberations portion and are now going to be talking about the final report, it's if you've spoken before, it's okay for you to speak again. And we've got few attendees, so I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes if anyone wants to speak on an item not on the agenda today. Have at it. We're all ears.
No hands raised at this point.
No hands raised. Okay. You sure? Well, not very many of you.
Another joiner, but no hands yet.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Okay. So I guess with that, we will move then to item number 4, which is member updates and group updates. So I threw a bit of a curveball, which is we have this final report chapter tracker and the final report feedback tracker. But as you hopefully you've had a chance to read my memo, I did a lot of reading and writing and tried to revamp the outline for our final report for it to just kind of make a little bit more sense. I think what we imagined this outline might be back in however many months ago seems to sort of evolved as the discussion has evolved, which is sort of natural. And I outlined for you guys my thoughts on how it might change. And I threw out some new chapter ideas and places to sort of collapse chapters. So wanted to give everybody a minute under this agenda item to just kind of talk about the logistics of writing the chapters and assigning who can write what in the next few weeks and stuff. And then the next agenda item will be actually discussing the chapters 1 and 2 themselves to be able to kind of go through that. So wanted to open up first for any questions. Was my memo clear? Oh, hi, In Young. I see that In Young has joined us. Was my memo clear enough? Did anyone have any questions, concerns? How's it going? Just checking in with everybody. Tony, I see your hand.
Nadia, I'm going to log out and then log back in because my internet seems to be unstable and I'm not connecting. So
okay. All right. Sounds good. We'll hold for Tony to come back at some point. Is there anybody else who had any questions on the memo or the chapters or how it's gone so far? How was reading the different chapters? Do we have questions? Anybody? It all went beautifully. There's no questions.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to understand. Are you part of the memo is sort of a proposed set of new chapters?
Yeah.
So you want to discuss that now?
Yeah, we can discuss that now. Yeah. Whatever you guys want to talk about in this part of like how to structure this report and how to move forward. This is fair game.
So what you're suggesting is a new chapter 3 that combines chapter 2, 4, and 5.
Yeah. So what I tried to think about was if I was a new council member picking this up for the first time and having to understand what this is. What is the logical sequence of reading these? And so the reason I thought combining those chapters would be helpful was that chapter 2 was originally like, what is the methodology that was used, which is really kind of what is our process. And I'm not sure, I think we can discuss all the various ways that we've done things, but I'm not sure it deserves its own chapter. And there was a lot of repetitive stuff between chapter 2 and chapter 4 that Phil had worked really hard on. And Larry and I are responsible for chapter 5, which is writing kind of what the recommendations are, but we've sort of co-written those as we've gone along. So I felt like, having something that describes in a brief thing what each alternative is to someone who's never seen it before, and then going through, the different bits of it would make more sense.
Yeah. Nadia, my concern is that this chapter 3 will be enormous because of all the content. It could easily run 60 pages. And we have to find some way to really structure it and practically offer a Reader's Digest version.
Yeah, so we will do that. There will be an executive summary that Larry and I will write at the end, which will basically be a prologue to all of this, right? And then we can discuss whether I threw in there an executive summary, like for example, chapter 3, section 2, I have Churchill, and then 2.1, I have executive summary. So we can give a short blurb about this is what we did on Churchill, and here's what I'm going to tell you about, and then go into detail, so that if you flip through the report, you could go through each of the alternatives and read a short blurb about it and not have to read the entire section. And so I'm hoping that will take care of the fact that, yes, I mean, there's kind of no getting around the fact that there's a lot of alternatives. I mean, we could presumably break up chapter 3 into 3 for the North Palo Alto options and 4 for the South Palo Alto options. I mean, I'm open to that. However we end up ultimately labeling these chapters is kind of open here, but and I'm open to suggestions.
I think it does make sense because it does reduce the need to keep flipping back between chapters in the former outline. That is, we've got it all in one place. That's the good news. The bad news is we've got so much to read in one place. It's inevitable given the structure of what we're trying to report on, but it's very important that we write crisply and that we edit brutally.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I feel there's an awful lot of repetition in the chapters I've read so far.
Yeah, and so that's why I tried to make this an amalgamation of those two so that we can cut that back, right? And so everything we have to say about Churchill, for example, is in the one section on Churchill.
So when I read the sections on the alternatives, some of them were fairly crisp, like 3 to 5 pages, which seemed about right. And there was one that ran 22 pages.
Yep.
It had an incredible amount of what I felt was duplication and probably some unnecessary information.
Yep. And I think once we fold those all together, that'll get cut. So Carrie and I wrote the underpass. That one has the most, but in our defense, there's also stuff in there that was for the appendix, which I just threw in there so I don't lose it and you guys can see it. So there's a lot of that. And it's also the alternative that was hardest to describe in words. I mean, it's kind of easy to describe what a hybrid is. It's a little more convoluted to describe who can make a left and who can make a right and where they can make those turns on a roundabout. So kind of needs more.
So what is going to happen to the chapters we all wrote over the last couple of weeks, including that one?
So what I'm hoping is that we put those together. So on page 2 of the memo, there's a chart, and I've tentatively highlighted people's names so we can, if you're looking at Churchill, I wrote Carrie and In-Young. So theoretically, if that works for Carrie and In-Young, the two of them can take what was written from chapter 2 and chapter 4 about Churchill and turn it into the format that matches what I have on, let's see, page 3 of my memo where the description of chapter 3 starts. I have actually page 4 has Churchill, and you have 2.1 through 2.10. They would turn it into that format about Churchill. Yeah, Carrie.
At the risk of creating frustration, that's not my intention, but I recognize it's a risk in this question. one thing that kept coming into my mind as we were writing these chapters is, understanding the boundary better between what part of describing this is staff's responsibility and what part is the XCAP. And I ask that just really to make sure it's clear, because I think that there's a lot that has been produced by staff or could be produced by staff, and what is the value that we're adding on top of that, and making sure it's really clear. Because to the point about it being duplicative, I'm really concerned that we're just rewriting for a large part of this, or rewriting stuff that staff has presented or that our contractors have presented on behalf of staff. And I don't want to get into that business. I really want to see the limited time that we have from our XCAP members focus on that extra thing that we're bringing beyond what, like some of the objective things that staff might be creating. Can you help me understand that a little bit better? Because you're right, it could explode. It could become a huge project if we don't understand those boundaries really well.
Sure. I mean, Philip and Ripon, feel free to chime in, because I can't say this is an explicit conversation that we've had, but the way I see it, XCAP is writing the report that council reads, period. So it is its own product. It is not a staff is producing something and we are writing the reader's guide to it. And so in some ways, the onus is on us to explain the alternatives that the consultants have done the work for in language that is readable to council members or members of the public picking this up for the first time. But if anyone else has interpreted that differently, or if there's a way for, I would love for XCAP to write less, because frankly, it's a lot. But I'm happy to take suggestions. Dave, I see your hand up, and then Philip and Ripon, if you want to chime in.
To Carrie's point, a lot of the sections that I had written for the previous chapter 2 were actually literally copied and pasted from the consultant documents.
Right.
So they are a repeat of that. So one way of doing this is just simply skip all that and point to the or put those in the appendix, those big info sheets, and then we only put in the color that we can provide that is not there. The deliberation stuff, our opinions, the community and feedback, all that kind of stuff. So that's another way of doing it. And yeah, it's the same, basically same text. So yeah, I copied it blindly because I didn't feel like why would I have to rewrite that, right? It's already there.
Yeah, Larry, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that we include everything. Otherwise, we don't document. And just because a lot of it comes from the staff or the consultant doesn't mean that it's precisely the same, because how we saw some of these facts are a little different than staff or consultant may have seen them. So they're inevitably going to be written a little differently from time to time. And I'm looking, and I really backing up what Nadia had to say, we're looking about to produce a document that is readable for who knows how many years into the future. And I don't know about you all, but I tend not to read footnotes, or particularly if they're at the back of the report. And I hate to flip back and forth. So I really want us to have something that doesn't necessarily have to be persuasive. People may or may not agree with positions that I took or somebody else took, but I want as much as possible for it to be one document that somebody can read it and say, okay, I understand what's going on here. Just one other factor on this, and that is well, I'm losing track of what one. I'll have to come back to that one. Let me stop right there.
Philip, I'm sorry, I jumped to Larry before you.
Oh, that's no problem. I'm not sure that I have much to add to that, actually. Yeah, I completely agree. Feel free to take anything that we've done, or that the consultant, but also let us know if there's something you're trying to find, and that something that could help you.
Philip, the reason I brought this up was last time when Nadia presented to council, staff had a separate report. And I was just wondering, is there going to be, like, is this a group effort with staff, or is there going to be a separate staff report of some kind, right? So we can understand if there are going to be separate, we need to know what's in yours, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I think, when XCAP is presenting their report, when you are presenting your report, I don't think we would plan on having a separate report that we would produce that would, yeah, I don't think that's likely. Likely it's a cover memo or something like that that, potentially provides some context. But just noting that our intention is to follow up after the XCAP report and, take council through any questions that they might have about, anything that, comes up from, their reading of the report. And I think that's kind of a question of, I guess we have to see when we get there, but I think it'd be really nice from staff's perspective if any XCAP members want to be involved in that process moving forward. I guess it's see when we get there how late in the year or next year we are, but I think that's something that we kind of had hoped we would get some support from people that are willing to stick around and help out with that once we get to that portion.
Yeah. Larry, I saw your hand.
Oh, yeah. What I wanted to add, I'd forgotten, is Nadia already mentioned that we're going to have an executive summary in various places. I want to emphasize that to make it more readable, I think various places, not just once, there'll be an executive summary saying, just for example, at Churchill, a majority of the committee voted to close it, and then the minority said they preferred modified underpass, etc. So that at least there's a roadmap for the reader. And Carrie, I want to just respond to you. The idea that the staff may have something addition to say or different, that's fine. Actually, that happens all the time, or it used to anyway, with the Planning and Transportation Commission. The Planning and Transportation Commission may take a different position than the staff would like. And I don't think there's anything council has to hear different views, and if they choose one rather than the other, that's fine. I don't see there's any requirement that the staff and an advisory group have to be on the same page.
I agree. I just wanted to make sure that we understood what we're getting into, because just responding to some of the commentary, which I agree with, that there are parts that are duplicative, and as long as we all agree that that's okay and that's what we want to do, we just need to be clear about it so that we can push through and get these things done. Regarding chapter 3, and the Churchill assignment, I would like to see people that are closer to those areas take responsibility for that chapter. I know In Young lives nearby. I don't know if there's somebody else that might be interested who lives nearby in taking on that chapter.
Well, actually, sort of part of the reason I divvied up who goes where, Carrie, is because you may be less familiar, and that makes you a much better editor of that section, because we need to think
happy to edit. But yeah. I saw Dave raise his hand, so we'll throw that out there.
Well, and this is up for discussion, but I think it's helpful for us to look at sections that we are least familiar with, because sometimes in our own descriptions, because we're so thick in it, we don't, we say things that we understand in XCAP shorthand, but the average person is like, wait, what are you saying? And I would just responding back to what Dave was asking. Dave, in some cases, yes, we have to regurgitate back exactly what's on the sheets, but keep in mind that we've been staring at these matrices for, more than a year. If you have a question about something like, oh, what was the, percent grade of such and such alternative, exactly where to go to on that matrix. The average council member looking at this for the first time is not going to have the time to find the block in the matrix that says, well, what does that say about this? And so I think, I go back to, if I was a new council member and I want to learn about grade separations, or if I'm a council member 10 years from now who wants to read about grade separations, I need to be able to read something in writing and not go back and read these, shorthand matrix, situations to be able to understand the context, because I think it's incumbent upon us to put that into words. And, there's going to be new Palo Altans who've never heard of grade separations who, several years from now may decide to read this. And so there is, unfortunately, some redundancy. That's what happens when we write technical reports. It's kind of like writing an operating manual for your printer. Find the on button. There's going to be some boring stuff in there. Certainly boring for us because we've been doing this for so long. But I plan on actually, my daughter doesn't know yet, so I'm breaking news. I'm actually going to have my 18-year-old daughter read this because I thought, okay, she doesn't know anything about this, and she's probably a good person to have to read this and understand, what it says. And honestly, I think the more people who look at it and look at sections that they're not familiar with are going to do a better job of explaining things than something that I know. It'd be much harder for me to edit a section that, like safety. It was interesting to look at the safety section because I knew less about that. So, but I hope that if we meld these things together well enough, we remove some of that repetition. And so what I'm hoping is that when we write, if you look at, for example, on the just to pick on Churchill, page 4 of my memo that has the outlines. So you'd have an executive summary that Larry kind of described of what you would tell someone about Churchill. We might have a timeline of the events. And I think the timeline is important because it tells the story. There have been some critical pivot points in this process. I think one of them is like when XCAP was able to get a chair and a vice chair. Another one was frankly COVID. Another one is when we got emails from Caltrain about some key issues. And those are important to kind of highlight in this as we tell the story of what's gone on so people can understand the evolution of what's happened. Then we could go into the viaduct, the partial underpass, the closure, compare and contrast. I threw in freight in there. I couldn't, not sure if there's anything specific about each alternative, but I wanted to make sure we have a catch-all for that. And then we can have the majority minority decisions, suggested areas of future work is kind of like the recommendations. And then, a brief mention of public opinion that basically sends everyone to the appendix to see those. And if we sort of follow a similar thing for each of the sections, I'm hoping that that will remove all the repetition that we had previously in our old outline. Yeah, Dave.
To Carrie's point, I'd be happy to switch with her if she wants to sit with Tony and do the discarded. If she promises to edit her chapter.
I will take that deal if
Yeah.
If that's necessary.
I do want to kind of, I think be sensitive to not leaving the impression that, this part of the report was only written by the people who live next to the tracks, or this part of the report was only written by the people who don't live next to the tracks. So I actually thought the assignments were kind of clever. Although the one that has my name on it seems like it's going to be a heck of a job to try and pull
yes,
together.
which I only realized afterwards that we might need to split that up into South Palo Alto A and South Palo Alto B or something, just for the sake of parity of the work. I just want to say this, keep in mind, this is just, we're asking these groups to take the first stab at writing this. We then all have the responsibility of co-editing each other's other chapters, right? So what we're going to do after this is to all of us go through chapter 1 and chapter 2. I expect that we might have maybe 2 meetings on reviewing chapter 3 where we go through and then review each other's edits. So hopefully we can dispel the thing that Greg just said where it feels like only 2 people wrote a chapter, because we're all going to have to chime in on it. At the end, we all have to sign off on this entire report. So the onus is on us to make sure we agree with everything in it.
Yeah, and so as a point of clarification, Nadia,
Yeah,
we're now talking only about the revised outline, not the original outline.
yeah,
Yeah, the chapter
Yes.
numbers are really confusing. You're totally right.
I know.
Yeah,
And so that, yeah, I'm open to suggestions on that too.
yeah, no, I echo.
Yeah, it's only on your end, Phil.
I don't know why. I've never had that problem before, but of course I've got Comcast. So what do you expect? I think we will need as subgroups to have our own little meetings in the next week so we can figure out how to divvy the work up or to restructure, maybe even to agree on the detailed outlines within each chapter. And we should jump on that within the next day or 2. Otherwise, we could slip out weeks.
Yes, Carrie, I see you raising your hand.
Yes, I just to go back out here, you and I just worked extensively on a portion of South Palo Alto and the chapter for that. And now we're writing new chapters, and I'm going to be working on a different section of the railroad. I feel really uncomfortable about that. Again, with the rework, is there any way that this can be made as efficient as possible? Like, is any of the work we've already done going to be retained? I know we asked that earlier, but.
So yeah, in terms of, for example, I think the underpass version is it's the longest. It's probably the one that's most complete. Oh, now I have an echo. Are you guys hearing an echo? Oh.
Sounds like it's coming from you because we're all muted.
Let's see.
And Nadia? Whoa.
Yeah.
Hey, Tony, can you go on mute too?
No, it's a huge echo.
I'm going to try again.
That's the kind of echo that happens when someone's got two meetings in the same room and they both have the speaker and the microphone on.
Right. Yeah. Is anybody
Nothing to do with Comcast.
I think Tony might have had that at one point, so I think he's fixed that. What I was going to say is, Carrie, I think our underpass section is the section that most resembles what I imagine our report to have to look like what the rest of the chapters will look like. So in some ways, I feel like that'll be a model for when we start to discuss chapter 3, if everyone gets on board with that.
Yeah, the underpass section is the one that contained the largest amount of inside baseball. And I was a little put off by some of it.
Great. So
I didn't agree with all of it either.
Okay.
So maybe that's the right format. But I mean, if we want people to do something useful with, we have to have more than a reiteration of everything that happened.
Great.
I agree.
I'm totally up for however we want to tweak it. So that's why we threw it out there for everyone to look at that.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just one comment on speed. I mean, In Young and I know that Churchill, yeah, we live there and all that kind of stuff, and we can talk about bias and all that kind of thing, but we know it best, and we could probably do the first cut very quickly to get it all in the shape. And then we could maybe do another round and hand it off to people who don't live there to go, or like Carrie or whoever else wants to go and slash it up later. And we can go do the same to the South Palo Alto documents too. So maybe that's the path to at least get it into your format as fast as possible.
Sure. Yeah.
And then we can go and slash it up and edit from there.
Yeah, so this is the challenge with the Brown Act. I'm just thinking aloud here. If we divided South Palo Alto into South Palo Alto Part 1 and Part 2, just so we could, because it's a lot of alternatives for South Palo Alto, obviously more than Churchill, then each group of 2 could share with a different group of 2 before our next meeting. In other words, you know, if you're working on the discarded alternatives, you could do that and then provide edits to Churchill when they're done. And then we could come back to the meeting and each group will have done at least two edits of each, you know, an edit of each group and written their own. So that might be one way to break this up. That's the benefit of having groups of 2s.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying we should break up groups of 2. I'm just saying we still have to do a little bit of work to put it into the format that you propose here.
Yeah.
So why don't we get it into that format, and then we'll show it to another 2 people and then move.
Yeah, and I'm saying
people up from there.
Right, and I'm saying is that whatever groups of 2 we decide now, we should probably also decide who your second group that you will show your stuff to will be and who'll edit what, so we don't have any Brown Act violations and everybody knows who their thing is going to. So everyone can be prepared to write their section and then be prepared to edit the next one.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
Does that work? Yep, Carrie.
What of these have already been drafted? Like, do we have the other chapters have been worked on the same way that we did with the underpass?
Yeah, that was released. Those were all the chapter 5s that were released.
So, right. So how much of this is new work and how much of this is just formatting? It's
more formatting than anything else. It's just reading the previous chapter 2, chapter 4, and then the chapter 5s, which each of us wrote a small section of the South Palo Alto one. We haven't done Churchill or discarded alternatives, so those have some new stuff. But there's The only one that's completely new is discarded alternatives. The others have some basis of you're just kind of amalgamating stuff together to create a legible chapter.
I see. So that's where I was getting confused. I thought you wanted us to start over and rewrite the
No,
whole
no.
everything.
Gosh, no,
Okay.
no.
Yeah,
No, so
I was
actually,
trying to get at that. So
no,
okay.
no. So if you look, Carrie, on the on our agenda, if you click on chapter tracker and you open that up, you can see all of the things that have already been turned in. So you can see for chapter 5, for example, we have hybrid, underpass, trench, and viaduct. So the idea is you would take those plus.
This is attachment 4A.
This is attachment 4A, correct. And so within that document, you have these hot links to all the various versions, like the latest version of each one of those. And so you would, if you were working on Churchill, for example, you would look at in Young David Carey's chapter 2, methods of used to understand alternatives, pull out whatever's Churchill stuff, put it together with whatever's in chapter 4 of Churchill stuff, and then, you know, turn it into something that resembles the outline that we are discussing now. Some alternatives may need new content, specifically Churchill and discarded alternatives, which you've never really talked about. Some of the South Palo Alto stuff is more pre-baked, which I now realize might have been why I only put 2 people on it, because they have kind of a bigger leg up, but it still might be a lot. And, you know, the next obviously conversation that we have to have is how does timing work, and what's, you know, how much time does everyone need to keep moving through this? Because as you guys are figuring out, it takes a while. And even if you wrote your section and then the other group gives you their section, it takes a while for that group to have written stuff, and then you guys have a chance to put in that feedback, right? And so the thing I was discussing with Philip before we came online, we are not presenting this to City Council until after the 1st of the year. So our timeline is somewhat fungible, but I think it's much better for all of us if we really make an attempt to try to push this all out before the year ends, so that we can get this done before the holidays. I would not like to spend any of, you know, the holidays working on XCAP. That's just me. But that's kind of the goal. And so, but I'm sensitive to, you know, it also matters what's coming up for you guys in the next few weeks. Was there any section that anybody did read of the different alternatives that, well, actually, I think it might be better for us to go through who wants to do which chapters. And then, well, I did have something that was highlighted in here. Oh, and does the group feel we want to put the leanings chart in there when we were deciding on alternatives for South Palo Alto, or not deciding rather on alternatives for South Palo Alto? So those are the 2 things I'm looking for feedback on, besides the obvious general outline.
I did not like the leanings chart. It led to a lot of confusion and miscommunication among residents.
Yep, I'm with Carrie on that one. Anybody else?
That makes sense to me. I wish that we could, we're not going to select an alternative, nobody panic, but I do wish that there maybe were a few things we could agree on, so that the result of this years-long process is not, we don't know, you decide. And I don't think it's going to be towards one preference or another, but that to me would mean us spending more of our energy on the recommendations for additional information. Like, I know when I wrote the chapter about the viaduct, a lot of it was, we actually didn't spend much time on the viaduct. AECOM kind of showed us the pictures and talked about it, and we didn't talk about it again for about a year. Is, hey, if we were to do this for real, we need to look into the following things. I know the underpass has those things as too. The hybrid has those things. The trench has those things. It's almost like we want to say, whoever takes this up after us, it would be wonderful if we could recommend, here are 5 things you should do. And armed with that information, it might be easier to make a decision.
I agree. So I think the suggested future work section is probably where I imagine we'll have the most discussion, because it's exactly that, right? Trying to succinctly say, hey, let's say we knew we had money to spend on these alternatives, or this alternative in particular, these are the things I would look at, you know, whatever, find new acoustic material, try to find out this or that. And so I agree with you, Greg. I think that's where we're going to have the most discussion on these, because I think the rest is going to be hopefully just a regurgitation of the matrices and stuff that isn't really
Yeah.
subjective.
Right. And I know that the one I wrote was a little more advocacy than some of the others, but it was, trying to make that point of like, hey, we could make this not so bad if we did some work on it. And I would love to have that. I think there's a letter in one of the many, many attachments this week that you wrote that included a list of recommendations. And I think that's really important. If, for instance, we had a more definitive answer on Caltrain's process for grade separations, and a more definitive answer on for tracking, and a more definitive answer on, one or two other things, then maybe this would be an easier decision to make. And I also hope that we can, I haven't read the financing chapter, I'm going to have to do that, but realistically, can we afford any of this? Is, I think, a chapter we need to have, so that whoever's taking this up can think that way.
Yeah, well, full disclosure, when you read the financing chapter, it's just a summary of how these things have historically been funded.
No, that's what I saw.
And yeah, so Larry, I saw your hand kind of do this.
I'm agreeing with Greg. One thing we will be saying in South Palo Alto is that the committee was unanimous in rejecting tunnels.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one that we have a
But
clear.
it'd be nice to be like, the committee was unanimous that we should reconvene when we know more about Caltrain's or something. I don't know. That's just an example, right?
Well, I see the future work.
Will be at the 20th reunion. So
the 20th reunion of the XCAP, right? Exactly. When they, yeah.
Well, I mean,
people who didn't do anything. Okay.
I do think the area of future work is probably the place where we all have to agree. Do we agree that this is what that is? And to me, that is a strong series of, hey, council, if you're going to take this up again, here's what we suggest. So I hope we can find agreement on. I mean, a lot of it is we all agree this needs more study. It's not even taking a position, just to say like, hey, we really need more geotechnical work. Hopefully we can all get behind that, right?
Right, but without committing the council to an infinite amount of engineering resources, what are the highest priority things that we think have a bang for the buck, right?
Yeah.
Well, I would add that in the financial section, maybe we need an underlined statement that says there is no practical financing in sight right now. That all the things we're talking about are so hedged that when you talk about not just our projects, but the rest of the ones that remain on the peninsula, you add it all up and you say, well, where's all this money coming from?
Yeah, the only one is
it's hard to see at the present time.
We already have a little bit of money from the county, maybe.
Right.
And isn't that enough to do the Churchill tunnel, under the Churchill bicycle tunnel? That might be the only one we can afford. That and reconfiguring Embarcadero, we can probably afford that.
Yeah. Well, and yeah. Okay, so just to go back to the leanings group, so I have Carrie, myself, and Greg who are no's on that. Anybody else feel strongly that we should include it, or are you okay to just not include it?
I think it's a quagmire.
Okay, so Keith, I'm going to add you to the no. Anybody else?
I'm going to ask a question instead. Can we come to an agreement on our recommended alternatives? Because if we can, then the leanings becomes irrelevant. If we can't, then what do we do?
You mean a recommended alternative for South Palo Alto?
Yeah.
No, we agreed that we can't. That was the.
Then if we agree that we can't, what's the next best thing we can do?
Yeah, and so the question is,
or may I suggest we revisit the question, one or the other. I think those are options. Either we include leanings, that's the best we can do, or if we think council's going to come back and say, well, why didn't you come up with the recommended alternatives? Then we should anticipate that question and do exactly that.
Okay, so how does the group feel about going through? I kind of feel like we might want to go through the intellectual exercise of what are all the recommendations for all the alternatives, and then thinking about what are the ones that we think are doable and which ones are going to, and kind of think about it that way. Low hanging fruit, medium hanging fruit, high hanging fruit. I don't know, whatever.
Nadia, can you,
Oh, Tony, I think you muted your phone, but now your camera is still working, but your audio is not.
Yeah, Tony, if you have two devices in the same room that are both in the same Zoom meeting and
Yeah, I'm
they're
trying to
both
turn one
unmuted,
off.
then it's not gonna, yeah.
Yeah, some cameras have a built-in microphone, just so you know, Tony.
Tony, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now we can. Just kidding. Now we can't. It's not working now. Tony, we can't hear you. All right, I'll skip Tony for now. Dave or In-Young, what are your thoughts?
I was just going to say that we should probably leave them out.
Okay. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And In-Young and Larry.
I'm not totally clear what precisely you want to leave out.
This was the chart that we showed on the screen at one point that showed leanings of what might have been your first choice or what might have been your second choice if you were forced to make an alternative, but that was, you couldn't really pick. This is for South Palo Alto.
So you're just looking at the second round choices. Is that correct, that you want to leave out?
Yeah, sort of that chart of leanings, which way everyone was leaning. And so the fact that it was just a lean is sort of descriptive in and of itself that it wasn't a choice, right?
No, I'm okay for leaving that out.
Okay, all right. That seems like a majority, so I think we'll take that out. Okay, so is everybody then just generally okay with the new proposed outline and the new proposed chapter order? Does that work for everybody?
Works for me.
Oh, Tony,
Yep.
we can hear you now. Okay, great. Tony, did you want to say, was there anything else you were trying to say before that we?
It's just that my internet is so unstable that I've only heard a quarter of the proceedings.
Oh, no worries. You're just going to write the entire report and we're going to see you in January. That's what we decided.
Thank you.
No, we were discussing whether or not to include the chart about which way we were leaning for South Palo Alto, but a majority of the XCAP agreed that we should probably just leave it out. So I think we're going to leave it out. So
On that one, I agreed with Greg,
Okay.
who said that we need additional information and that we should outline a list of what that information we thought should be.
Okay. All right. So in terms of the work as it's divided, I had in there discarded alternatives was going to be Dave and Tony. Did I hear that Dave and Carrie are going to swap places? Did I get that right? Carrie, is that okay with you?
I've already said my piece about writing on yet another area, but
well, I mean, yeah,
what it
we've all got to. there's just a lot of writing that has to happen, unfortunately.
I guess for me, the case hasn't been made why we can't just finish with the other and then, like, I don't know why we're changing horses in the middle and redoing it again during, I mean, Thanksgiving is in a couple of weeks. Like, it's surprising to me.
Well, did you want to go on? Did you want to be on South Palo Alto so you could work on the underpass? I'm not sure I know I'm not sure I understand what you're asking for. So just come right out and say it.
At a more macro level, I don't know why we're changing this process right now when we just went through and made the former version, right? Can't see it because my background. But the original set of instructions for the documents we were creating, and now we're changing it to a different set that causes us to rewrite them again. And I'm only frustrated. I'm not trying to stop it, but I want to make sure that is your intention, because I thought we just went through and created these other chapters.
Well, I think we did. What I'm saying is we need to add into the chapter that you created the piece that describes what's in the original chapter 2, which is the methods used to evaluate, that explains kind of what was in there. And then chapter 4, which was things that we've learned, and kind of put those all
It's
together.
okay. I wish we could be done. I wish we could have finished it with the chapters that we wrote and be done. I don't know why we're resetting the whole expectation of what the chapters are. And it sounds to me, what I'm gleaning from your proposal is that it would make more sense this way, and that we do still have missing information that we have to add in either way.
Yes,
right?
I think if we read it all, I don't know if you've had a chance to read it kind of from chapter 1 all the way through. When you do, you'll see there's a lot there, but there's also holes, and we need to stitch it together. So this is the attempt to stitch it together. That's kind of where we are.
Yeah, I've seen that. I thought we were almost done. That's expectation setting on my part, but I need to realize that we're not.
Carrie?
Yes.
I can only observe that for something as complex as this, it's not surprising that halfway through we discover that the original outline doesn't work. And we have to bear in mind that if we don't have a really good report, it's much less likely to have any real impact on the council, which is what we're all trying to do. Now, that said, I'm pretty tired also.
Yeah, I think we've all reached XCAP fatigue.
Yeah, but I think it's important to recognize that writing a report like this probably takes far longer than most people initially anticipated.
Yep.
So I'd like to ask Nadia, what do you think is our realistic, or Nadia and Larry, what do you think is our realistic completion date?
Well, quite honestly, it depends on how much we are able to get done as a group, and like what we have what we have the bandwidth to complete, and in what time frame. I mean, if we're
Yes.
able to work fast, then hopefully we can be done faster. But I also don't want to push you guys and say this has to be done in a week, turn around 2 chapters, because
it won't be. I mean, realistically, can we realistically expect to have this done, let's say, by January 15th?
That is my goal. I'm hoping for even sooner, but
I
part of
agree.
it's going to have to be that people are going to have to push out hard and pass it on to
Yep.
the next group, and then have all the challenges. Obviously, it's not just doing that, but also having it in time for Sarah to then post it. This is where the Brown Act is the worst part, and we kind of knew that at the very beginning. But it is just the problem that our final answers are due by Thursday, even though our meeting isn't ready until the following Wednesday. That's almost an entire week.
And there's no way to, originally that date was Friday, not Thursday. What happened?
Well, it's still Friday. The thing is that in order for Sarah to stitch together so many chapters, because now there's so much being produced, and then also the city staff has, I forget how they have every Friday is, what's it called? I'm going to make up a number. It's like a 1090. It has a number name to it. When
It's
they
a
have,
980.
thank you. Like it's a 1090, like a W2. I don't know. But they have off every, I don't know how many Fridays it is. So they don't always work on a Friday. So then that also pushes things. We do have on the bottom of the agenda kind of when the next proposed meetings are. So we'd have another meeting next week, which we don't necessarily have to do if people can't turn around work fast enough. Because we can't really make it so that 2 chapters are probably due by next week, since everything would be due by this Thursday, right? That gives us 48 hours. So probably not likely. The problem is that the week after that is Thanksgiving. So if the group wants to try to meet, for example, I checked with staff, and the week of Thanksgiving would be available. We could aim for that.
That might be necessary.
Yep. And
given that we're going to lose time around the end of December anyway.
Yes. Yeah. And so if folks are able to commit to the Monday of the week of November, hold on, my calendar is not, what November is that? That would be Monday, November 23rd. If we can have an XCAP meeting that day, then that means drafts would be due by the 19th, which is next Thursday.
Yeah, I just checked my calendar, and that day is good for me, as long as it's not in the morning.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to be available that Thanksgiving week.
Okay.
Other people may.
All right. How many people are not available? That will make it easier. 1, Greg is a no. 2, Tony, 3. Keith and In Young, I can't see you.
Could be available. Not thrilled, but could be.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody's thrilled. In Young, are you around?
She's muted. In Young, you're
In
muted.
Young, you're muted.
Yes, I'm available.
Okay. Okay. Well, if we can come up with a good schedule of deciding that we're going to move through, X number of groups of 2 so that we have a lot that's edited and done, then I think that if we could meet on that Monday, that would work. For those who couldn't make the meeting, though, you're missing a chance to kind of edit. We'd have to ask you to send in whatever edits you might have or give those to somebody else.
So I still have my name and Keith's name on probably the most complicated chapter to pull together. I'm not exactly sure how we're going to tackle that other than starting by cutting and pasting all the existing documents and trying to consolidate the sections. It seems like it's going to end up being a rewrite and not a refactor.
Well, for the underpass section, it sounds like you might be cutting more, so that's good. That's at least something to edit if you disagreed with it. Open to suggestions. Do we want to cut it up?
We might just have to rip the Band-Aid off and do it. I'm just saying it's. I don't know how splitting it into more people is going to make it easier.
Yep. Agreed.
So, I don't know if, Keith is busy the next week, but maybe I can take some time and then share it with him. I'd really love to not have to use Microsoft Word for this, but we'll figure something out.
Do Google Docs and then
and then turn it into a Word doc at the end.
Right, exactly. So just share it with Sarah and then Sarah can turn it into a Word doc when she has to pull it in.
Yeah, because
that's what we've done.
Track changes thing, everything ends up with 7 spaces after every word, and we've all the editing I've done has been in Google Docs. It's been easier. Anyway,
I share your concern. It's when you put stuff together, sometimes it ends up being like an organ transplant where keeping the patient alive is very hard.
Yeah, if you don't mind, maybe I will try in the next few days or the weekend to pull something together and share it with you, and then maybe you can make some sense out of it, unless you'd like to do it the other way around.
Well, how about this? Why don't we make it so that the discarded alternatives and Churchill people are ready for the week of Monday, the Thanksgiving, and you guys can have another week would give us, I think it's December, what do we have on the calendar? December 2nd. And that gives you guys more time.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to be the issue. I think it's just going to be, a little messy at first.
Okay.
And it might take a few iterations.
Greg?
Tony, you might need to mute because we can hear the echo.
I just have one device on. Wait.
Tony, I think you might have 2 devices on because we see you twice.
Yeah, we see 2 of you, your phone and your camera. So if you could mute it looks like it's your computer that's not muted.
That's
Okay, Greg, when you were talking about the chapter you're working on, are you talking about page 1 of Nadia's memo report outline or page 2?
Nadia?
Sorry.
I'm going to catch up later with you guys.
Okay.
This is getting annoying and I can't get it fixed.
Okay.
Bye.
Try calling back in.
I think if he hangs up both and tries again, it might work better.
Yeah. Tony, we still see.
Yeah, I think this is the problem. I think that Tony's got Zoom running on his
Tony,
PC.
you have, Tony.
I think
Yes.
Yeah. So you have it on your computer. We see you on your computer and on your phone. We see you twice. So try shutting out of your computer and your phone, and then try joining back in the meeting on whichever. Just pick one and try with
All
that.
right.
Okay. Cool.
So sorry, Phil, I'm talking about on page 2 in Nadia's tentative, the new chapter 3, South Palo Alto. Keith and I are going to do the best we can with over the next couple days or a week.
All right. Okay.
That's what I'm talking
I
about.
didn't see your name there. That's what had me a little.
It's the one that's highlighted in green, Phil. We're all looking at so you have Dave, Tony.
Oh, you know, I'm looking at a printed copy. Maybe that's my.
Oh, so in the printed copy on page 2 of the memo, in the middle of the chart, you should see names that are highlighted in the column that says, in the column that has everyone's names, they're the only 3 that are highlighted. So Phil, I don't have you actually down for a chapter because you had already written a lot. I know you were having computer issues. If you wanted to work on some of that, you by all means, you can. Sounds like they could use the help.
Yeah, well, I will say that I'm suffering post-report fatigue syndrome.
Yes, I know. You've already written several chapters. And for those
So
who-
I will be happy to work on a review. That second, please, I just need to focus on other things in terms of creating new content or restructuring content.
Okay.
Yeah,
Carrie.
I don't mind in the next few days. And Keith, if you don't mind, I will try a Frankenstein assembly and then share it with you. And then we'll
Yeah.
see where we are and how much work. And we might have to draft a 3rd person to help with the
Yeah, well,
Frankenstein
I'd be
if it's
glad
really
to
bad.
consult a little bit, but please. By the way, I should also add that, not to be contrary, but I really prefer Word to Google Docs. Not to be contrarian, but.
I think once we're almost done, it's great. I think it's great for final assembly. I think when you have 3 or 4
Well, what
people
is-
working on the same doc at the same time, it's yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what SharePoint was created for, but we don't have SharePoint.
Yeah, makes it hard. Carrie.
So are we still talking about the Monday of Thanksgiving week?
Mm-hmm.
And isn't that a whole week off for school?
It might be. Yeah.
Okay. And
I mean,
still want to do that?
I don't want to have to do any of this. And that's why I asked very tentatively, are people available? I mean, here's the situation. If we can't meet next week because it's too fast, if we skip the week of Thanksgiving, that puts us at December 2nd. But then we're going to have a similar churn period where they're going to need another 2 weeks. And then we get to the holidays. So then we don't meet again till the last week of December. And then we'll start to get well into January. So it's going to take several more meetings. So
And then we don't get to council till February.
right. And so I'm just trying to, if you're not excited about doing this now, imagine in February trying to think about finalizing this, right? So on the one hand, I'm just trying to push us through whatever we can do to get this done, because like I said, I'd rather not have to think of this after January. But if we can't make that happen, and I recognize it's not easy because I am in the same boat, then, it's just dragging out. And this is part of the fatigue that I'm worried about. But I mean, we're at the point where we've got to summarize what we did, and it's not fun. So yes, I am talking about the week of Thanksgiving, unfortunately. But the calendar doesn't get any easier as it keeps going, and the motivation drops precipitously.
Well, I just want to, we've been very accommodating of school schedules so far on this body, and I just want to make sure everybody realize that that's a holiday for the kids.
Yeah. What the next meeting would be after that would be reviewing what's been presented. So, it offers an opportunity for people to chime in, but it's not going to be the last opportunity because we're probably going to have a lot of reworks and stuff. So I just want to make it clear that, if you end up having to miss that meeting, then, we'll just expect whatever your edits are afterwards. I mean, that's the best I can do to make sure that this keeps going. There's going to be a lot of, bad dates for everybody going through the holidays. That's just how it's going to be. Okay. So, if it's okay with you guys to move ahead then with this agenda, then we can move on to editing chapters 1 and 2. Does that work for everybody, or does anyone have any other questions, what have you?
I never replied to Greg. Yeah, Greg, if you are willing to take a shot at it, go for it. I'm busy till the weekend, so if you,
Yeah, I might get some time before the weekend, but I will try not to drag it on, and then I'll share it with you, and we'll go from there.
okay.
I just realized, Philip and Ripon, I did have a staff request. So on page 5 of my memo, I took a picture from this was a town hall presentation that the city had done back in February, and it has that graphic that shows the estimated timeline of like when XCAP makes a decision, how long this process takes. And I recognize that because of COVID, there's sort of probably not, we probably couldn't replicate this graphic necessarily, but could we give something that says, when council makes a decision, this is how many years it would likely take for design work, and this is how many years it would probably take for construction work, depending on when everybody begins. But something that is maybe more generic, but lays out for people like, if and when council makes a decision on something, how might this go?
I think a lot of that's going to be the next discussion, the next phase of the discussion. And it's going to, somewhat come down to funding and a series of other questions. So I think we have something that's kind of rough, but I think it's going to be very rough at this point, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's fine. Just something I was hoping to kind of explain to people, then, once you read this, well, now what? Right. And kind of.
Yeah, but I think just to further elaborate on that, I think it's not even like measured in years. It's more like this is what the steps that come next. And I think that's probably a more accurate representation of what we know, the known knowns right now.
Yep.
So, yeah, but I think, we could probably provide you kind of like the next steps in the timeline without necessarily assigning years or months or days or anything.
Well, and what I'm actually looking for is something that explains, like, even if council decides on something, that the city has to work with Caltrain before this happens, and that the city has to work with VTA before that can happen. So something that just explains what are the gating factors for some key decision points, right? There's some elements of this that Caltrain has to sign off on any design study before we go study things. There's some, VTA would have to agree to something before giving us.
Nadia, sorry, I totally get where you're going. Don't mean to cut you off, but I think a lot of that's going to be dependent on the direction that we end up getting ultimately from council with what alternative and all that. But I think we can kind of lay out the next steps generally in the process. But I think you're being really, really into the the really fine points to be kind of dependent on which path we take.
Okay, great. Well, whatever we can do to just.
I do want the chart as Nadia outlined it, and we can have some limiting language. The idea of it is that anytime you're talking about a 10-year timeline, obviously there's going to be imperfections in it. What the point is that the public, so many emails we got or comments that indicate that people thought that whatever we decided was going to be implemented the next day or the next week. And I want people to understand that this is a long-term project.
Yeah.
And that, so that I don't care what directions the council gives or not, because they really can't speed up the process very much on their own.
Yeah, well, just to not to make things further complicated, but today VTA released a info item to TAC, which showed that they had removed all grade separation funding for the next 10 years from their Measure B budget. And essentially they're taking all the money to go to BART. And now this is an info item and it's not something that's been decided at this point. It's something that we provided feedback on, but I just want to let you know that there's a lot of things that are really, really fuzzy at this point.
That just makes the timeline longer, that's all.
That's right. But it really brings into question what are the next steps? What things do we do next? And what phase do we enter? And will the same problems necessarily exist? So it is an interesting situation we find ourselves in.
But I think to Larry's point, like, look at this chart, and it has, for example,
can you share the chart you're talking about?
Oh yeah, sure. Let me hold on, share screen, and then so it has here You know, the May 2020, the council would decide something, environmental process might begin however many months later,
Yeah.
improvements, agreements. So even something as basic as from the point where council decides, it would take 3 years to get funding design or design certified. Then it might take another 3 years to get to permissions. So we don't even need dates, just so much as like,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is
I see
about
that.
the average time it takes, right?
Yep.
That's what I mean.
I would
Yeah.
see a vertical chart that way, so that somebody, so you can, so at the bottom of it, you could say total time elapsed, estimated total time elapsed, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, whatever it is.
Sorry, Larry, you were breaking up on a little of that, but I think you were asking about how much time elapsed maybe for each different phase. Is that what you were talking about? Or were you talking about in the total, you know?
Well, that's what Nadia was saying. I would put the chart on the vertical axis rather than the horizontal, and so that people can add it all up on their own and make their own guess. But so we can have a total down at the bottom and saying that 10 years, 15 years, whatever you want to come up with. But the point is get the idea across to the public and council members, for that matter. This is a long, drawn-out process.
Yep.
Yeah, because this chart doesn't even discuss funding or, you know, all it talks about is if things went smoothly and decisions were made fast, this is the shortest amount of time. And I think that that's really important because, you know, later when the council reads our report and we've come up with all these recommendations, part of what they need to decide is, okay, well, what short-term things might we be able to do, or short and medium-term things could we do, you know, to prepare for this eventuality while we wait for other things to come into focus. And so understanding that some of this stuff is going to take 20 years helps you understand how you might order those.
Yeah, we'll see what we can provide on this.
Great, awesome. Okay, so going back to, now I realize I'm sharing my screen. Phil, this was what we were talking about. So just to confirm, I'm swapping out Carrie and Dave here, correct? We're just switching positions. Yes, okay. All right. Great. I think with that, we can move to the next. Do we need to officially move
So
this?
where's Greg's name in that green section?
Oh, here, hold on. Here, Keith and
Oh,
Greg. are
sorry.
working.
Take it
No
back.
worries. Okay, I don't think we need to officially move the agenda unless, or the outline, unless somebody wants to, right? We can just move on. All right, with that, then we are moving to item number 5 on the agenda, which is writing and editing. So we're going to discuss chapters 1 and 2. I have to take public comment. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this agenda item? Again, this is item number 5, and it's the now about the writing of the report.
We have three attendees and we don't have any hands up at this point.
Okay. All right. Okay. So chapters 1 and 2, I have on my computer, chapter 1, which I will share so I can edit on the screen as we go through this. And I think Carrie had described this process. Carrie, tell me if I get this wrong, where we sort of just go through if there's substantive edits. We don't need to worry about typos and small things, like I just caught a typo there. But you know, if there's substantive things that people disagreed with or didn't, you know, thought we were missing stuff, that's kind of the stuff that we're trying to talk through here. So I'm trying to figure out how to change my view here so I can see all of you and still be able to edit here. Okay, I think I've got it. Okay, so did anyone have, actually, I realize this is the wrong chapter. This is chapter 2. I need to open chapter 1. Sorry, bear with me as I go through my technology here. Let's see. Here we go. Sorry, struggling. Okay, Tony, I see your hand up. Welcome back.
There you go. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. So just on the connecting Palo Alto, I would recommend that the connection, the rail connection that connects Palo Alto to other cities is really important for our businesses, and our on the other hand, also it takes cars off the road and makes neighborhoods more slow. So I didn't see the acknowledgement to the benefits of rail connection.
So I think that that's covered in the part where we talk about the comprehensive plan and kind of why this is an important part of, it's the backbone of the system and things connect to it. And then we show, you know, the existing growth and everything. Did you think that we needed to add a line in there somewhere? And if so, did you have a specific place where you thought it should go?
I didn't have a specific place. I just thought it should be acknowledged that it's a huge benefit to Palo Alto.
So what I'm hearing you say is maybe something on that describes Caltrain in our community. Is that maybe?
Yes, yes, something.
Okay. I think that might be something that works in chapter 2 where we describe the community context.
Okay.
We could probably put it in there that describes a little bit more about the role that Caltrain plays today.
Yes.
Okay.
There is a section 4 of this chapter which talks about supporting public transportation goals, the number of riders who work in Palo Alto, so on and so forth. So I think there is some data supporting it, and I wonder if it would just, you know, if Tony would suggest a paragraph. I wonder if that would make it clearer.
Okay. So I'll just add a note in this section.
Yeah, if I go forward, like in my copy, like around page, oh, there are no page numbers. Okay. Where you see the 2040 gate downtimes, you have to go up.
Okay.
Yeah, like this whole section here, right? Section 4 and onward might be a place to add what Tony is suggesting, because it already talks about how important it is.
Yeah.
And for instance, how it plays a key role in Stanford.
Yes. Oh, I'm on my husband's computer, so now my husband's name is showing up as a suggester, but I will fix this afterwards. Okay, suggestion, add more info about.
I'd like to go back to the first paragraph. I was concerned about the first paragraph.
Okay.
I'm sort of jumping around, but
Yep, no worries. It's okay.
Want to get that back on the screen?
I'm here.
Well, I'll tell you what my concerns are. First, I think we got too many different thoughts running around in there. And it's not a paragraph that really leads into it. And actually, I think that we ought to borrow the paragraph that we have on the city's website. Because it also talks about the primary driver of connecting Palo Alto is the electrification of Caltrain, and we don't say that in the first paragraph, and I think we should.
Okay. Does someone have any language that they could read off to me? I'm happy to just change it live if that's easier.
Go back to what before. Let's see. Anyway, just go to the first paragraph that the city has on its website on connecting Palo Alto. I think really is a good model as to what we ought to be saying.
Okay. All right. If someone can look up a sentence for me while we're doing something else, I'd appreciate that. And otherwise we can keep going. That way we can kind of tweak this as we go. Yep, Dave.
Now that we're down to the chart, the arrow seems to me to be inconsistent. It's pointing to at least on my screen, it's pointing to the blue section, where over there on the rectangle to the right is where XCAP recommendation is.
Yes, I agree. So we should probably take this out. I stole this from a
Yeah, I think
graphic.
people will figure out where we are without the arrow.
Yeah, well, I stole this from one of the city graphics, and the question about, do we even need this picture, or do we want to remove it altogether? Is it additive? I'm happy to edit and cut as much as we feel is appropriate. Do people think the graphic helps, or?
You can get rid of the "We Are Here" arrow if editing is
Okay.
allowed.
All right.
You know what Larry was saying before, how we think, some people think that whatever we decide is going to be done tomorrow. I think something like this is good to just show the process, whether it's in this format or something else is your decision.
So, but if we include this, do people then think that the decision making means that regional funding is being assessed and local funding strategy is being defined? Is that really what's happening right now, or is only the XCAP recommendation happening right now?
Well, I would argue that regional funding viability is being assessed right now. So
Okay.
I think that's fair. The local funding strategies, being defined is a little more murky, I'd say.
Philip, is there any chance that you guys, because I just cut and pasted, that's why it even has like the slide number 7 in the corner. Is there any way you could send me then the soft copy of this so I can edit this graphic?
Do you have any idea what that came from? Was that from?
Yes, it was from the February town hall meeting.
Okay, I'll see if I can find that.
That'd be awesome. Okay, let me just include a comment here.
This is a little deceptive because if we move the arrow to the right, then we're saying that we're done with community engagement. And
We were saying do away with the arrow totally.
Yeah, that was my suggestion. Just get rid of the arrow.
Okay.
Just leave that.
That's true.
Top.
If you can't find a copy, it's definitely easier to erase the arrow. But I'm looking for a copy right now.
Yeah, I think remove the arrow and page number, which is visible because I just copied.
Okay, I agree with Dave. I missed your comment, Dave.
Okay. Great. Next, Dave, I saw your hand up. Yep.
Throughout this document, you mentioned COVID, pre-COVID, all this stuff. You might want to figure out a way of kind of going, well, what the heck is COVID?
What are grades operations? What is COVID?
Well, just
if you
a little
think
bit.
the world will ever forget. Okay.
Exactly.
Maybe, but you do just kind of pop those in there, like, oh, pre-COVID, this and that. There might be something that you want to just kind of go, hey, we're in the midst of a pandemic that we popped up and this happened. But I saw that. But I also saw that later in the document somewhere. I thought, I can't remember which one it was. Maybe it's in the ones that you asked us to read.
Yeah, it comes up several times. I mean, it comes up certainly in chapter 1. It comes up again in funding for chapter 2, where we're like, look, we don't know where we're going right now. I mean, because it talks about I think the election even.
So maybe then somewhere here, it's like you talk about, hey, we're in a pandemic. We were in the middle of XCAP and all of a sudden, boom, the pandemic happened. And then nobody has to talk about it again, except in the context of, what's important about this, given the current times, something like that.
So what about, okay, this is connecting Palo Alto. What is XCAP? What will happen once XCAP makes its recommendations? And then before we go into even what are grade separations, we can define COVID.
Yeah, define COVID, or the fact that it happened in the middle of XCAP and some of the effects of it, right? That happened, the ridership went down, and maybe it could be a way of just kind of pulling it all together, because you do mention it a whole bunch of times in here. Like,
I think it's better. I think it might be easier. I mean, I can certainly define it here. Obviously, the cover note is going to talk about it, and then I think it still makes sense in the context of each of the sections that it's in, because if I throw everything in here, like it affected grade separations and the order in which we received alternatives, I think it's too much for this section. But I do think, maybe a young person 15 years from now picks this up and hasn't studied COVID yet in school and wonders, well, what is that? So we can define it here. Right?
Would it be easier to just say pandemic and it doesn't matter? Like, I'm just throwing that out there as an idea, because it doesn't matter that it's COVID. It matters that the pandemic was disrupted.
Yeah, let's call it pandemic. I like that.
And then whether they have context or not, they can understand that word.
Okay. Okay, so change COVID to pandemic. And briefly define?
Briefly described, yeah, define
Yeah.
it. Thanks.
Okay, great.
I mean, I really don't know if everyone's ever going to forget COVID. I don't think you have to waste a lot of time on this, but whatever you
Yeah,
think
it's
is
fine.
cleanest.
Two sentences is fine. I don't
I would
mind
agree
it.
with you. The only thing I would add is to put a date in, because 10 years from now, people might forget when it's really started. So I would put in around March 19th or whatever date you want to say.
Agree
Yeah.
with that. While we're on the cap section, I have a comment, but I don't know. I don't want to interrupt you.
Yep, no worries. And I would just say, even when it started is relative, because like my daughter's school was the first one to close in the nation. So for me, it started in February, but for most people, it started March. So you know, it's all relative. But yeah, Carrie, you were saying.
On our first two paragraphs under what is XCAP,
Yep.
we start by talking about what is the cap. I don't know. I wasn't on it, so I don't know if that's super relevant, but you spent a lot of time on it. And then the opening sentence is a little bit vague. I was wondering if we could be more specific, you know, like working on what to do with. Didn't have suggestions, but I feel like we could be more specific. And I was also thinking about language from the website. So
Okay, so how about on separating cars from cars, bikes, and peds from trains at Caltrain crossings?
in anticipation of electrification or something like that. Yeah.
That's one of those things, Nadia and Carrie, that's one of those things that we're going to define in the introduction or maybe even a glossary at the start, so we don't have to what a grade separation is.
That's a good point. Well, and I in trying to help us be a little less prolific in what could be a very lengthy document, we're spending a lot of time on background of the background of the background. So I don't know if that paragraph is even necessary or if it could become one sentence. So that was just one thought I threw out there.
No, I think we need to define it once and for all, though, so you don't have to keep reading, so we can just use the phrase grade separations and people will know what it is.
Oh, sorry, I was referring to like our first paragraph under what is XCAP is really answering what is CAP.
Well, it describes cap and then explains that it's called XCAP because there was a cap before. And the only reason I thought that was relevant, by the way, was I went to the website and was imagining if I saw all the documentation that's been presented, there's a lot of stuff that happened under the cap that then kind of rolled forward. And in trying to understand how people would understand what that was and why is it expanded community advisory panel, what happened previous to this, the expanded kind of begs the question like, well, was there something before? And so that is kind of why I threw that in there, but open to suggestions on how to make it tighter for sure.
I see.
It was more just, there's a lot of stuff on the website that predates XCAP, frankly. Entire sections, actually. Yeah, Tony.
Nadia, just a clarification. I was cutting in and out of when you were talking about Larry and you writing a short summary of the whole report.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And that's right on top, right? The first.
Yes, that would be before any of this. So we have here.
Yeah.
It would be preceded by an executive summary. So
Thanks.
That would be the executive summary. Sure. Okay, so then what is a grade separation, existing conditions? I tried to throw in a lot of graphics because I think it helps break up some of the language, frankly, and just makes it a little easier for folks to understand. If anybody thought that there's better graphics, please chime in as well. Anybody else? Tony?
On this one, I was wondering if you need to mention that if we do not grade separate, we reach incurable queues with the existing trains, and I didn't see that there, but something.
Yes, so we have, let's see, this is the part on accidents, and then we have one This is the gate downtime. So it tells you how much more gate downtime there will be when more of them happen. And then this one talks about, and I realize it's like kind of off the page. This talks about a gate downtime. And then I believe in the community context one, hold on, let me read. I think that's in chapter 2, which is basically why do we need these? Hold on, let me go through and I'm looking right now. Nope, I don't think we have it there. So do you think we have it? I thought we had it. I thought I had it described. I read this a while ago, so now I've kind of lost track. But I thought we had something here, unclearable cues. I can make the font bigger if it's harder for you guys to see. Let me see if that's better.
Thanks, I did not read that.
Okay.
But maybe uncurable cues or gridlock or something.
Yeah, well, I called it traffic. But maybe gridlock is a better word, actually.
It's more understandable to normal people.
Yep. Is everyone okay with changing that to gridlock instead of traffic?
Oh, gridlock has a special definition as opposed to just bad traffic.
Well, which I think it is, though, is that with the cars cannot clear, and that actually is gridlock. Philip, is there a technical description of the word, or Ripon, is there a technical meaning to gridlock that is that more appropriate or less appropriate, or does that mean something that we don't intend for it to mean?
Yeah, technically the gridlock means when the intersection is blocked by the cars that it cannot move the other direction. So that means that the other direction cannot move because of the occupation of the cars in there.
Well, so I think gridlock then is appropriate, because what happens is that the lights will fail to be able to clear the queue. Is that different? Is unclearable queues different from gridlock?
Yeah, gridlock is just when no one can go anywhere. It helps to have a grid to have gridlock, which we don't at any of our grade separations. We do downtown.
Well, and we don't have we don't have a gridlock per se, because the lights are timed specifically to get everyone out of the way of the train, because otherwise they'd get hit. If there was actual
If we had gridlock, people would be hit by trains, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Leading to traffic backups, you might want to say, rather than
or congestion.
Congestion.
Okay.
Congestion would be another good word to use.
What was wrong with
Extremely
unclearable
frustrating
cues?
congestion.
We have unclearable cues, but we're also trying to add in there like normal words.
Backup, maybe another traffic backups.
Sure. How about traffic backups and congestion?
Or leading.
Traffic jams.
Sure.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Great. Does that work for everybody?
I'm happy.
Yes.
Okay.
Every time I see congestion, though, I think I can cure that by going to Walgreens and getting a cold run. Nope. Okay.
A little Vicks Vapor Rub. Okay. Anybody else? Were you guys okay with these graphics? I thought these were useful in terms of how much percent.
I think the graphics are great. I'm glad you found them. I'm glad they come from Caltrain, which means they're recognizing some of the problems too.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, no, I'm finding it on.
And
Nadia, I want to go back to the reasons. I'm not sure whether we passed that or not.
Sure. Let me zoom out a little bit because it's a little.
I would.
Right. So here.
Which section?
Where we list the reasons for
That's the link to the
doing grade separation.
Okay. Yep. So we have. What is a grade separation? Then Caltrain grade separation plans.
No, no, the 4 reasons why we're.
Okay.
Yeah. So why does the council want grade separations? And I think that when you list things, they ought to be in order of priority. And I think that even though safety is important, I think that the most important one for why we're doing grade separations is to remove the congestion.
Okay.
So I would put that one, road congestion first, and put safety number 2.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I know that that is what most people have been saying.
Well, I actually saw it, Larry. The reason I'd put it in that order was because the council has agreed that grade separations are something they want. And as a result of that, they recognize that their decision means that that there will be congestion, because they're also supporting the concept of Caltrain. And so that's why I had sort of nested it that way. It all comes from the fact that they've taken this position that we support Caltrain and that is not going to change. And we support there being more trains because that's good for Palo Alto and that is not going to change. And so as a result, our comprehensive plan is planning for these separations because we will need safety improvements, we need to reduce congestion, and we need to support public transit. But I mean, I think they all sort of tell, they're all very intertwined.
Really think,
Go ahead.
I agree with what Greg just and actually, I think if you go back to the website, the city, at least through staff, says that the reason that we're doing this, first reason we're doing this is because of the electrification of Caltrain. And we ought to face up to that. A great issue, but you're never going to get citizens of Palo Alto to spend however they're spending it, millions and millions of dollars to just on a safety standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we did in the 30s, but yes.
Well, it came from the feds.
Oh, did it?
Other people's money.
Other people's money. Well, then, okay, I take that back. I mean, to me, it's super important that safety is in here. I'm really glad it's in here. I'm glad Caltrain is recognizing it, and I don't want to quibble about the order.
Okay. That means reordering these sections, which I can do offline. Okay, I'll make a note here. Oops. Okay. Anybody else?
Nadia?
Yeah.
So I think one of the sections should be the bike and ped access across. And I think it's important enough to put it into this introduction. And connecting Palo Alto is also about connecting bikes and peds and kids and old people.
So I think read this, Tony, and tell me what you think. Let me zoom in a little bit more for you.
I thought it might need its own section, like improve safety. It's connect bikes and peds, because the comp plan has a number of policies that move us in that direction, that show us that show that it's a bike ped friendly city. And maybe it's not that important, but I think it is.
I think it is. I put in here a bunch of placeholders, so you can see I have that there's several policies related to grade separations, and see Appendix X with policies. So I've tried to I started a separate document, which I think is part of it is in the underpass section that Carrie and I worked on. I put some of it in there, but I went through the comprehensive plan and pulled out all of the policies that deal with bikes, peds, and grade crossings, and that will be a list basically that goes into the appendix. So people could refer to that section. But you're saying, I mean, this section is really, why do we need grade separations? And I don't think, I agree with you that bikes and peds is a main thing. I'm not sure that we need grade separations because of bikes and peds.
No, I agree. Yeah. Yes, I agree.
Okay.
but it needs to be emphasized somewhere.
Yeah, well, so I have here, one of the 8 themes is to reduce dependency on single occupancy vehicles. The multi-pronged strategy includes improving bicycle and pedestrian access throughout the city while also supporting the development of further transit, right?
Yeah.
So it makes it clear that is the guiding principle for all of the city's planning.
Okay.
If that's not strong enough, I can go back and fix this.
I think it's just the strength of it that I was
Okay.
concerned
Feel,
about.
any suggested language? How can we make it stronger?
I don't have good language skills.
Yeah, I have to say this is very challenging for me because I think when I type, and so I've never had to sort of live edit like this. And so I just see myself making notes for me to do this offline because some of it's just hard to do with everybody watching.
Okay.
What was that?
Go ahead, Larry.
No, I didn't. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Nadia, you don't have to live edit on screen. You can have all those same notes on your without broadcasting.
Yeah, I think it's just easier for everyone to also see that I've encapsulated it correctly. And if we're changing words, I want everyone to be able to see those,
Okay.
right? But thank you, Carrie. I appreciate that. Okay. Anybody else on this section?
In the congestion section, or when you have a sentence, I'm trying to figure out where there are 3. Single biggest cause for traffic in Palo Alto is the existence of at-grade crossings.
Yep.
Is that really true? I don't think so.
Yeah, in fact, I was trying to remember Wayne, Philip, what is the name of the consultant whose name is Wayne that was working for the city for a bit?
Wayne Tonda.
Yes. So Wayne Tonda gave a presentation to the council about transportation projects overall, and this was actually part of his presentation. Did I get that right?
It can't be the single biggest cause for traffic. Is the existence a grade crossing doesn't cause traffic in and of itself.
Well, the unseparated crossings are the single biggest because they interrupt at peak hour.
I'm focusing on the word traffic. It's got to be changed to congestion or
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, the single biggest cause for traffic in Palo Alto is 101.
Right.
And the second biggest is 280.
Well, but those are not technically within our city boundaries.
No,
I guess technically not.
It's not traffic.
Yeah, it's congestion.
That word.
Is that right?
That's. Yeah.
I'm struggling a little bit with the word cause.
Yeah, so am I.
I think that's the only one that I have a little bit of trouble with is the word cause, because I think you could argue the biggest cause of congestion in Palo Alto are jobs or something else. I think that's the only trouble that I'm having with it from a
So what I remember Wayne Tanda saying was that by far and away the single biggest project that would could alleviate congestion is grade separations. So
that's different.
That's a different, yeah, I'm thinking that I didn't capture that well in what I wrote. So suggestions on how to wordsmith that.
Single biggest opportunity to reduce traffic congestion would be the creation of grade separations.
Sure.
Yep, that's great.
Kind of a long sentence, but. Okay.
We don't need to. We're going to be saying this what the grade crossings are. Why couldn't we just end it at the creation of the grade separations at the 4 grade crossings or 3, depending on how you want to look at it.
Mm-hmm. You mean take out this part?
Yeah.
Okay.
I still see you're going to get pushback from people to say, that's all we got to do to reduce traffic congestion? How about
Well-
reducing jobs?
Philip, if you have any offhand recollection of when Wayne Tanda gave that presentation, I'm happy to cite the source. I was trying to recall even what time of year it was. And so I didn't really know how to.
Actually, I don't believe I was with the city when he gave that presentation, because he actually was, I mean, he only helped me with Bicycle Boulevard's project once I got to the city. He was serving more before I arrived in the city. So
Okay,
unfortunately, I have no idea, but what I was taking from that makes sense to me.
When did you join? So I can look before you joined. I'm happy to go find it.
August
Okay.
2019.
Okay. I'll see if I can find it. I remember it because it struck me when he said that. I was like, oh, okay. Wouldn't have thought that was the case, but when you hear it, it makes sense, right? Because it runs the length of the city and interrupts continuously at the same time. Okay. Anybody else?
And I would just keep that paragraph short, because you could make arguments like, well, if Elon Musk made a Hyperloop in Palo Alto, that would help too. You know, and just say that. I would just make it simpler and say that it would help, and not necessarily say it's the greatest.
Yeah, I think he's right.
Okay.
Or we could say something like, one of the most significant opportunities to reduce traffic congestion would be.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that.
And that would end the sentence with the creation of grade separations, period.
Okay.
We bring back this same group to be the flying car committee.
Not it.
It might take that long. Yeah.
Hey, Keith, I was just going to say, I was reading today about the Hyperloop, and Elon Musk is no longer part of it. I was surprised to read.
Yes, we have to leave.
He's given his ideas to the couple of companies, or more than 2 or 3 that are working on it. Anyway, don't mean to go off on a tangent here.
I'm not interested in being on the Hyperloop community.
Exactly. Larry, we'll let them know if you're
I'm
interested.
going to let Larry do that one. Yeah.
Exactly. Not it again. Okay. Anything else on this section? Did anyone have any notes? Was there anything that was?
I think this section is looking really good, actually, and I'm really glad that it's looking good.
Great. Well, it will come back. I mean, we're trying to do the majority of the stuff now, but like for example, I didn't add in the piece about, I didn't connect it yet to where Measure R is, although yay that it passed. We haven't all met since the election, but phew. So, okay. So with that, if everyone's okay, we can move on to chapter 2. I can pull back up chapter 1 if anyone thinks of something, but let me move us to chapter 2 and share my screen there. And let me increase the font a bit.
Nadia,
Yes.
as a time check, when do you think we're going to finish tonight?
So we had 4 to 7. So hopefully by 7 before.
All right.
I'm hoping we'll go before, but
All right, thank you.
yeah. Okay, so here was my suggested layout for stuff we should discuss. Phil and Ripon, if I could ask if there's a clearer version of this graphic, or if we might have to make one, because I notice everyone keeps copying and pasting this thing and the quality is degrading. If there's a version of this that we could get, that would be useful for the report, because it's kind of fuzzy.
Yeah, I'm not sure where this one came from either. This one predates me as well. This is from 2017.
Yep, exactly. And so
was this part of the city council meeting September 6, 2017?
I believe that it was. And so the question is anyone able to get the soft copy of that presentation and then just replicate this so that because we've lost quality so many times because it keeps getting copy pasted.
Yeah, this one will be a little bit harder to track down. So things that predate are a little
Maybe someone
a little bit hard.
Could retype it, and we'll.
Yeah, if someone could retype it, that would be great.
I'm not saying I'm going to do that, but.
Yeah, I don't have the skills. I don't have the logo. Like I can't put this together, right? So
Also, just in general, whoever converted this document to PDF for inclusion with the packet didn't have the same fonts you did. So if you look at the PDF version of this, we all got an email this week. It's actually very difficult to read.
Yeah.
Whereas this is looking great. So I don't know like what happened and why chapter 1 got converted correctly and chapter 2 didn't, but there was some weird PDF-ness going on.
Huh, that's good to know. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, anyone have?
There's some confusing stuff with the freight trains. And the pictures
Okay,
of
yes,
the model.
thank you. I knew there was.
The model railroad stuff, especially where it says freight trains can travel at steeper grades. I think I know what you mean. Right underneath the two trains, you're saying freight trains can. I think what you're trying to say is that freight trains are capable of traveling at a steeper grade than 1%. Just the Caltrain won't let them.
Sure.
But it makes it sound like maybe freight trains can travel at steeper grades than passenger trains, which is not the case. And I don't think you need to rewrite it now, but maybe you could, you know.
Hold on, because I just realized I started touching this before being in edit mode. So let me put this in edit mode.
It requires some explanation about how railroads assign the number of locomotives for a train of given tonnage.
I don't think we want to go there. I want to be super simple, which is
okay. That
trains travel at 1%.
Freight trains can travel steeper grades if they add on additional locomotives.
No. They can travel at 2% grade on the Caltrain right away without having
they
to
can
change.
travel at 3-4% grade,
but they don't need to add locomotives to do that on the.
No, 2%. No.
Okay, so freight trains can travel at steeper than 1% grade.
Yeah, but 1% is the Caltrain design standard.
Yes, and that's what this is about.
Yeah.
Nadia, I would change the graphic from inch to feet.
So I stole this off the internet. Do I have anyone who's volunteering to make this graphic for me? Because this is the best I can find.
Yeah, I don't know how to do
Yeah, it came out of a model railroad catalog website.
I found it on the internet. I was like, score, I'm just going to use that. And so this is where if anyone has any graphical skills whatsoever, I offer you this. Please help.
Certainly considering it's used CP rail.
I mean, anything to make this graphic better. I agree it's terrible. It was kind of a test of who's been paying attention, so you all passed.
It's cute, but it definitely took a little time to understand, like, why does she have inches on there?
Yes. So if anyone can make this graphic, does anyone have any graphic skills?
Graphic skills.
Yeah.
Great. Carrie, would you love to take on
Tony can hand draw it.
Tony can hand draw it.
Do we have to explain why there's freight on our railroad? Because I think early in the process, there were a lot of comments to the effect of like, if we could just get rid of the freight.
So I tried to address that here.
Oh, okay. Actually, maybe there's more in here than I saw before. You're right. You are talking about the Mission Bay hauler and so on and so forth. Okay.
Yes, I tried to explain what it is and where it goes, and that there's a trackage rights agreement, and that so basically like they're not going anywhere. As we know.
And all the stuff that it does carry has to get from point A to point B somehow.
Right. And then there is a little piece where we go into the fact that there was a request by the mayors of San Francisco and San Jose. So Union Pacific was looking to sell their operations and they were going to sell it to a short line operator. And so I made reference to that in here because I wanted to include the letter that shows that they asked for that change to 2% because I think that that's significant.
Okay.
I know you're going to change the graphic, but I really find it confusing to be talking about a grade of 10% or 20% in the graphic, and then we're talking about 1 or 2%.
I actually think that graphic is wrong. It's actually that's not a 10% grade. That's a 1% grade.
Yeah. So
wait, that is a 10% grade. Oh, okay.
It depends what the model train is that they're running, right? But I guess
no, you're right. That shows a 10% grade and a 20% grade.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to make this for 1%, 2%, which is actually what we're talking about, and I would actually flip it. I'd put the 1% here and the 2% here, right? And then put the distance. And I don't know if Tony, if you want to calculate how many feet that would be, right? Because there is an actual mathematical calculation of if we go 1%, it's this many feet. If we go 2%, it's this many feet. that would be super helpful if I've got any
1%
volunteers.
is
for that.
1 foot over 100.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So whatever we want to turn this graphic into, and whoever can, is there anyone who can do that?
I don't know how to do that. I can hand draw, but
That'll work.
Yeah, but try to include a Caltrain locomotive.
Okay. Is there anybody else who has some
And
more
I can
graphic
supply a
skills?
photograph of a Caltrain locomotive if necessary.
Oh, creep.
yeah, then I can draw the angle.
At this point, if someone showed me their Lego set and took a picture of it, I'd be game. So I'm just desperate for
Okay.
somebody to replace this
I don't have a
picture.
Caltrain in my house, otherwise.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I have like a squishy Caltrain thing that I might be able to use for modeling purposes. But
Phil, if you send me a Caltrain, I'll attempt it. Ask my daughter to do it.
yeah, anyone, this is a great project for someone who's got kids who are into graphics.
Yeah.
I'd be down for that. Okay, so I'm just going to put in here replace graphic. So Tony, will you be able to take that on and see if you can replace this graphic?
Yes. Yes, I can do that.
Okay, I'm going to put Tony to attempt. Yeah, and if anybody comes up with an easier way to describe this, that would be awesome. Okay, outside of that graphic, anything else? How did the high-speed operations section sound, everybody?
Yeah.
I would put in 2 more things, Nadia.
Yep.
I think it'd be appropriate to point out that the city of Palo Alto's official position is in opposition to high-speed rail.
Okay.
And second, I would put something in there that says many experts believe that it is unlikely that high-speed rail will ever come to the peninsula.
Okay, so
Yeah, I've heard this first thing before, and I don't know what it means. The council said we officially don't support high-speed rail. When did the council? When?
So
what does that even mean?
So
it means that we spent. I was part of the council, Greg. It meant that we spent a lot of effort trying to oppose it after the election that authorized the bond issue. We joined with other cities around the state in opposing it, particularly a group of cities in Southern California, and lobbied in Sacramento and so forth. And that work did in part lead to the creation of the so-called blended solution, which is the compromise, because originally high-speed rail wanted to build well, either new tracks or just take over what Caltrain had.
Right. Okay.
So
actually wanted to build 2 new tracks. It was going to be an entire 4-track system from
Correct,
San Francisco to San Jose.
So that's right. So that I just want to. Can we please keep this a factual statement? So the factual statement is the Palo Alto is officially a go. Sure.
Yeah, no, it wasn't just it'd be nice. We really acted on it.
Larry, is this correct? I have the city of Palo Alto is officially opposed to high-speed rail due to their incomplete business plan and incomplete environmental review documents. Is that?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. And then I'm sorry, you had a second point which I missed when I was typing.
Oh, that I'm trying to be polite on it, but many observers or something like that believe that Caltrain, that high-speed rail will never have the assets or ability to get here.
Okay. I thought I had a line in here somewhere about that. Phil, you had, because some of this is from the language that I kind of took some of your section in here.
I don't remember anything specific about that.
So unless we have something to reference a particular expert or something, I feel like that's just a statement of opinion on whether high-speed rail is going to work. And honestly, most Californians probably have a similar opinion. So why do we need to put it in our report?
Well,
unless we have
yeah.
something to add to this debate.
Here, actually, it's right here. The estimated date for high-speed rail in the Peninsula Corridor has recently been extended to 2031, and the project has had implementation and funding challenges that are likely to extend beyond that date,
Yeah.
but their potential arrival has impacts on the corridor planning and future co-operations. So
I think the important thing for us is that Caltrain is operating as if high-speed rail is going to come.
Right.
That is affecting our planning process. So whether or not we think high-speed rail is going to come, they think it's going to come, and unless they change their mind, we have to work with them. So maybe we should say something along those lines.
Yeah, and
I think Greg is absolutely right about that. I'm not sure it makes sense to add the part about how we're officially opposed, because
yeah, I'm not sure that it's the only reason I'm not sure this is a good addition, Larry, if I could just say, is that it seems to imply that we have any way of stopping what's going on, and I don't think that that's necessarily true.
Well, we never did. We have. I don't mind it coming out, but I do like the idea of having a statement in there that that many observers believe it's never going to get here, and there are all types of citations. The LA Times covers this on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And,
but I think.
But do you think, I think though that Phil's point still stands, which is even though we don't think it's going to happen, we still have to plan for the potential arrival and the impacts it might have on the corridor.
Because Caltrain is.
Right. And then we have here from that I go into that the fact that there's an MOU, which is why Caltrain has to plan for them, even if they don't show up, because that MOU has not changed, right? And unless
I think we do it, but the way it's worded now makes it sound like it is going to come, and the only thing is when.
Okay.
A huge question out there, and I think the majority believes that it won't ever get here.
I guess my point is that if you ask the average Californian on the street, when is high-speed rail coming to your town, they're going to laugh at you. So unless we have something actual to add to that conversation, I don't even know if we need to say anything.
So my opinion is that there's a high probability over the next decades that it'll come to San Jose, and which means it dumps a lot of people onto that Caltrain route, which means Caltrain has to increase service. And so the number of trains are hopefully going to increase anyway, but it'll have additional passengers.
So they're short 27 billion.
Okay, so that may be, and that may be the governing factor, but to Tony's point, once high-speed rail reaches San Jose, there's no real reason to stop them saying, and let's just keep going onto the Caltrain tracks because they share common electrification.
Yeah. I think I'd rather take out the line about the city of Palo Alto because I don't want to, I just think it muddies the water unnecessarily. I think we have in here, I'm comfortable with this line that says they've had funding challenges. It's likely to expand beyond that date. And no matter what, we have to plan for their potential future co-operations because that's what Caltrain is doing. And then the next line, we basically go into the MOU. I think that this touches on both. The only reason, I mean, if it hadn't been that Joe Biden won, quite honestly, I'd be very comfortable saying, ain't no way, ain't no how this is happening because we're short 27 billion. But I also know that Joe Biden happens to particularly love trains. And there is still a potential that he throws a lot of money at high-speed rail. And so now I'm not as sure as I may have been before, I will just say.
Yeah, I think us speculating on politics is also dangerous
territory.
Yeah,
it takes I will just say they are short 27 billion to complete the part to San Jose. So, either way, I think what we've written captures it.
Yeah. So Nadia, can I digress ever so slightly? It would help if we had footers with page numbers.
Footers with page numbers. I'm sorry, what do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, so.
Agreed.
That's probably takes 1 minute if someone tells Nadia what to do in Word.
Yes.
Yeah, in Word, I know how to do it. I have no idea how to do that in Google
you just
Docs.
you need me to put page numbers on this.
Yeah, let Google Docs automatically put a footnote with a page number. Make it a lot easier to do our comments. So I do have comments, and I've handwritten the page numbers in, but it might be hard for other people to follow.
Okay, what I understood is these things need page numbers, which I know how to do. I'm not sure I understand the footers with page numbers. So can someone help me with that?
Easy. In Word, Microsoft Word, it's really easy to do. I
And
just
she's
don't know
using
how-
Word.
I'm in Word, so go for it.
Okay, well, why don't we do a 1-minute phone thing offline? I'll tell you how to do it.
Okay, but explain to me what the function is. So I'm not.
Okay, you do you go to insert in the Word, and then you look for headers and footers,
Yep.
and then you'll find something that says insert page number. You know, I just look at the Word. How do I say this? I don't have all that memorized. I just go through the menus until I find what I need to do.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
But it's
Yeah,
very easy
I
to
will
do.
insert page numbers. Yes, page numbers I get.
That
Okay.
should apply for everybody's docs, by the way, not just
Yep.
this one.
Nadia, just guide me on this one. I'm not sure if this is chapter 2 methods used to evaluate alternatives.
No, we're looking at chapter 2. Part of the
No, I get it.
community
Yes.
context. Yeah.
All right. So we'll get to methods used later, right?
Well, that's part of what you guys are now amalgamating together in your new groups that we came up with.
Who's the group? I missed that part.
You are with Carrie, working on
Carrie and
discarded
I, right?
alternatives. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If there's any other formatting stuff that I could use a tutorial on, by all means, please educate me, because as I confessed from the very beginning, this is not my strongest suit.
I mean, if
Neither.
we wanted to be really fancy, someone could create a Microsoft Word template for all of our chapters. So they all have the same font and the same headers and footers. But I don't know. A long time since I did that.
Yeah, I don't know how to do it, but if somebody else, I mean, when it's all done, could I hand that to someone and they could do it?
I think we are going to need a word formatting expert for the very last part of this.
Yes.
All right,
This is
so I'm afraid by default I'm it, but that's later on
okay, but I give it to you in the end, right? We don't need to do that now.
at the end.
Okay.
As long as people at least tag things like headers, like header 1, header 2, header 3 consistently, then it becomes easy.
Okay.
Otherwise, it becomes a disaster.
Well, let us know what we have to do.
It means that when you want to have headings, you create a heading structure. Heading 1 could, let's say, be the
Yeah,
title
no,
of the chapter.
I think it's this thing, right? So you do this here, and then you go to where's the heading thing that? No, there's one of these that has what it looks like, right?
Keep going up to the right. Keep going right. No, oh no, not that one. Okay, forget it. We'll do it another time.
Yeah.
Which version of Word are you running on, Nadia?
That's a great question. I'm on my husband's computer, and so I have no idea. So,
All right. Well, you see, it may be a little different than what I'm used to, but
yeah.
Hey, Nadia, it's right there. Do you see normal? No
Yeah, that's right.
spacing,
Go up,
heading
go
1,
up.
heading 2?
Oh, here, duh. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
use that. Don't just change the font to 24 point and bold or whatever is what Phil's saying.
Okay, cool.
Use
All
those
right.
styles and then it's all fixable.
So heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. Okay,
okay. Easy peasy.
cool. All right. I'll undo that for now because we'll come back to it. Okay, anything else?
Carter study?
I'm sorry, what was that?
No, I'm just trying to ascertain where we are. Are we still on freight and
We are kind of jumping around on chapter 2, so I'm open to anything, whether it's freight. After freight comes high-speed rail operations. After that, we have the corridor use and policy and 4 tracks. Did anyone have anything on that? I tried to cite as many of the documents and not produce my own language, so it would be easier.
I had something, I can't read my own notes. Bullet point number 2 under Carter study.
Bullet point number 2. Okay, yes. Right here.
Oh, yeah, I thought that we ought to emphasize more directly than that the Carter study does not implicate the work that we've been doing, that they are very emphatic that the design or which choice that we make is ours and not going to be theirs, at least at the present time.
Okay, how about Caltrain will not be involved in specific designs for each city?
Right, okay. Well, we've got to work that a little bit so it flows better, but let's not do that right now.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Also, I don't know why the bullets are different sizes, but I can fix that.
One thing I didn't like about this was it made it look like we were passive observers. And I think we have to be working here to insert ourselves into the study and make sure that this study assists us.
Yeah, so this is actually, see this sentence here, I actually just took this from a previous presentation. So I kind of just recycled something we'd already presented to council. I will say that as we get into like on the underpass section that Carrie and I wrote, we have very specific, strong language about, going forward, we ought to be involved with the Caltrain corridor study, and here's why. So it's not in the description of what it is, it's in the recommendations for later. And I think that that's probably an appropriate place to kind of push for that. Because this is just setting the context of what we know is happening. Whereas in our recommendations, we're saying, hey, council, we couldn't decide on this, but you need to pay, we suggest you play an active role moving forward, and here's how.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. The executive summary, though, we have to, one temptation is people think that this is kind of being put on the shelf, and we have to really fight against that.
Yeah.
We are not stopping grade planning. We are just transitioning to a new state, and that state is still going to take a lot of work. So we have to have that expectation clear.
Yeah.
Particularly in the executive summary.
Yeah, no, there's clearly a lot of people in town who prefer that nothing happened. And I think we need to, if we believe that's not the right course of action, we need to continue to emphasize that.
Yep. I mean, I think the byproduct of XCAP is, congratulations, you are now all professional transit advocates. And so I hope to see you at future council meetings when these topics come up, even when we're not on XCAP to talk about them. Because that's just kind of, when you see people show up at council meetings who have this kind of strange depth on certain topics, it's because usually they've served on committees like these and have a passion for it. So I won't be surprised to see you guys at future Caltrain meetings or future council meetings talking about these things.
We'll carpool with Roland.
Exactly. He's everywhere though. Okay, I did put in there a blurb about the Caltrain governance reform, but really just talked about the different districts that were possible, partly because that comes up in like funding for grade separations and something that might be discussed in the eventual study, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys caught that.
Nadia?
Yeah, Tony.
I'm sort of a visual person, and when I look at context, I think about the context of the neighborhoods that abut the tracks and the quality of those sidewalks and trees and leafy kind of feel that it has. And I think that kind of context, I'm not sure if it sits in here, but I think somewhere we need a paragraph that talks about the leafiness of Palo Alto. I don't know how to say it any better than that, unfortunately. But
so do you think that that's covered? I mean, to me, that having read the comprehensive plan, that is the entire comprehensive plan. So I think our strong reference to that in the beginning, saying, look, this is the guiding document, it talks about that. And then certainly, again, in the section that Carrie and I wrote, when we wrote our recommendations for the underpass, we reference the fact that future councils ought to be really relying on the comprehensive plan to look at whether these things fit and upgrade probably their criteria accordingly. But I'm not sure we can go into I don't want to attempt to describe our community physically in this section, because to me, that's the comprehensive plan, right? Everything about paths and streets and bikeways and art and all that stuff. I mean, that's the entire comp plan.
Okay.
We were about to get to the section on funding. I want to make sure that we talk about
Yep.
that.
So, okay, governance reform, now funding. Yes.
So 100 years ago, AECOM brought in some consultants on funding and they gave us a presentation. And we
Yes.
had a chart of potential funding sources and how much money one might expect to raise from them. And I wonder if some numbers would help this section.
So I went back and looked at that. I spent a lot of time looking at those, and I have to say that there was a lot of disagreement about the numbers that they presented. So a couple of things, they had sections where they pulled some numbers that made it seem like entire funding programs would be at our disposal, which they wouldn't have been. And then they had sections where they talked about potential debt that we could take on, but didn't explain how that would be paid. And so none of the graphics I felt were particularly useful for this conversation, because they ended up being actually, frankly, part of the reason why XCAP eventually got formed was because there was so much stuff in there that didn't quite jive. So I couldn't find anything that would be useful. If we wanted to create, we can always create our own table. And if somebody wants to take a stab at that, that might be useful. I thought that the important thing was not necessarily what are the buckets of funding available, because frankly, that's for policymakers to think about. And it's going to depend going forward based on COVID and elections and all sorts of things, but more to give the context that the way we have funded grade separations in the last 150 years has changed as a result of the history of the corridor. So in the very beginning, there was this big block grant of federal funding as a result of the Great Depression. Then in the 90s, the big building spree happened in San Mateo County with their own funding source of Measure A. And then we passed Measure B. And then ... because as Philip just said, just this week we had breaking news on Measure B, right? So I just wanted to highlight the fact that the old funding
Potentially
paradigm
breaking
changes.
news. Sorry.
Yes, exactly.
It's
okay.
still just an info item and not a recommendation at this point.
Yep. But it's an example of stuff that might matter afterwards, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I put here, it remains to be seen how Palo Alto, Mountain View, and Sunnyvale negotiate.
Okay, so it never occurred to me that the share of the $700 million we might get would be zero. But there you go.
Unfortunately, the backstory is that was it a Measure A last time, Philip? There was a Santa Clara County Measure A, and there was funding for grade separations, which eventually the VTA board decided to give the money to BART. And so when the second round was created in Measure B, the money this time they made a special clause that the money out of the grade separation bucket could only be moved by a supermajority of the VTA. And so, the question is that still possible? It's still a possibility, but hopefully more remote, but we don't know.
And at least right now, they're not talking about completely eliminating the grade separation funding. They're just talking about deferring when we would start receiving it so they can pay for BART now.
Yeah.
So that's what they're trying to prevent BART from having to take a loan or a bond or something.
Well, so I guess one argument is that if communities don't have a plan to use the money, then they're not going to be likely to want to hold on to it. Okay, but so two other things then. One is, okay, fine, but it feels like if there is money available, we should mention it. The other thing is there was talk on that presentation about this Melrose Community District, where the people who live near a particular improvement are allowed to authorize additional taxation for that improvement. Now, it didn't seem very realistic to me that would happen, nor did it seem like it would raise very much money. But it does exist, and it's a thing. And it's a thing that, in theory, Palo Alto could use for transportation improvements.
How's that if I put it in here? I
That's
listed.
fine. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. I very specifically did not want to elaborate very much here because that gets us into the realm of us discussing funding. And so I just wanted to say there's other options. Y'all can discuss them.
Well, now that it's made the screen, I have trouble with down under funding grade separations where it says costs are rising in the Bay Area. I'm not sure that's true right now.
Where's that line, Larry? Can you point?
Under funding grade separations, first bullet point.
Okay, hold on. Historic funding sources, sorry, help me. And there's no
Sounds good.
page number, so you can't tell me a page number.
There it is.
Okay.
Down.
So this was a direct quote from Sebastian Petty's conversation. I think what he means is the costs of grade separations are rising, not because the construction costs are generally rising, but because the complexity of grade separations today versus what they used to be makes it more expensive. So because before, now you will have an electrified railroad, which requires electrified shoe fly tracks. That inherently is more complicated and more costly than if you just needed to provide a passing track for a regular diesel train.
Well, then we ought to say that.
Okay.
The words that are troublesome then are in the Bay Area.
Okay. So let's see.
Well, I think you want to, costs are of any grade separations are likely to increase over time because of electrification and their positive train control and more complex systems.
Yeah.
What are those complex systems
Well,
beyond PTC?
Well, I think it's PTC. I think it's so it's both the wires and the cables and the PTC. And then in addition, let's say you're the peninsula and you have this, measure B bond measure. Someone's building a grade separation in year 6, but someone's building it in year 30. If you're running 16 trains an hour by then, the complexity of doing a bypass then is much more expensive and complicated than it is if
But I'm trying to get at is the cost of construction for the shoe flight tracks is the electrification and the positive train control.
Yes.
I don't know of any other more complex rail right-of-way systems.
Yeah.
So it's really just electrification and PTC.
Okay.
Those may be the more complex rail system. So otherwise it's kind of an uncertain, what else don't we know about that might bite us?
So how about, let's see, the cost of grade separations
are higher now because.
Well, it's not higher now. It's really likely to increase.
Well,
Yes,
all right.
yeah.
Will be higher for Caltrain because of electrification and
Okay.
PTC.
It's also just because of general inflation.
Well,
Right.
that's a separate point here.
Yeah, that's a separate point. And right now we don't have inflation. And you never know what. Remember, this is a document that we're hoping will be relevant for 5 or 10 or 15 years, and trying to predict.
So
where costs
for any grade step anywhere in the state or the country, at some point positive train control becomes an issue. That's general. For Caltrain, uniquely, it's the electrification infrastructure.
Okay. So does this capture it? The cost of grade separations is likely to increase due to electrified infrastructure, positive train control, and more complex systems?
No, that's redundant. It's just positive train control and electrified infrastructure. Yeah, I'm not sure what's meant by construction methodology and standards. If anything, construction methodology like jackboxing might reduce costs, but otherwise the standards are unchanged.
Well, the standards are making it more expensive because they haven't changed. In other words,
Well, yes, but that's not what this implies. This implies that we've got moving target standards that are going to be made more stringent and therefore cost more to comply with. That's how I read that.
Okay, so help me with language then.
We could just say that I'm not sure that sentence adds anything.
Well, this is actually, again, this is a recap from something previously presented to council, where
Well, but that doesn't mean, do we have to be rigidly governed by that?
No, we can take it out.
It just doesn't add anything to the discussion.
Okay,
Agree.
great. Anything else?
Nadia, we're going to have to define positive train control somewhere. Because if you haven't come across it before, positive train control, what in the world does that mean?
Right.
It's complicated.
You can
Uh,
probably just capitalize it and put a link to Wikipedia.
Yeah.
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 Make it all make it
Yeah.
capitalized.
Sure.
Okay.
It's very complex on a national scale, and the railroads have gotten repeated deferrals of their deadline dates to implement.
Well, I know that, but I'm worried our ordinary reader doesn't.
Well, of course not.
Yeah.
Ordinary reader probably never heard of it.
Right. Oh. Happen.
well, and it's even more complicated because, yeah, electrification is actually positive train control and CBOS and a whole bunch of other things put together.
Well,
but-
CBOS is just one technology to implement positive train control.
right.
The big issue for the railroads is interoperable PTC. So railroads, locomotives from one railroad can run over tracks of another for trackage rights operations.
Hmm.
That plus putting in the infrastructure, period.
Okay. Anybody else? I tried my best to summarize Measure RR here and what we know at this time. This may or may not change as we continue to write this report.
Oh, I don't think we want to say as of the writing of this report. I think we want to say.
Well, so the reason I put that in there, Larry,
Sorry.
I put that in there because what we know about how much to be provided annually is a guesstimate from what's on Caltrain's website. But now that it's passed, I suspect there may be more work by Caltrain to provide some hard numbers. So
I wasn't focusing on that. I'm just saying, as of the writing of this report, it applies to a number of things that may or may not have occurred, but Measure R has occurred.
okay.
In November 20. In November
I'm
2020 voters.
Technically, it's the same place as the presidential election, which is that California hasn't finished counting all the votes. It sure looks like it passed.
Okay. So how's as of winter 2020?
I think you could just say that it passed, and we could assume that by January, California
Yeah.
will be done counting the votes.
Keep it simple. In November 2020's election.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
right. I go with the.
Beautiful. Okay.
Yeah.
Do we want to say anything about the fact that Measure RR funds operation of Caltrain and is not expected to provide any funding for grade separations, or is that an assumption?
All right, what is
that, let's see. I took this from their website, and some amount of funding goes to. So it's complicated because some amount of funding does go to capital improvements. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go to these grade separations. But for example, if Caltrain needed to upgrade something that was a capital improvement, it could potentially fund a grade separation. It's not likely, but it's still possible because they give money. There's the ops budget and the capital budget, and this would provide some portion to capital. And
Yeah,
so I
so,
can't quite say that.
As a realistic example of a capital budget item, if Caltrain needs to maintain diesel train operations all the way down to Gilroy, they might need new locomotives in a couple of years, diesel locomotives.
Mhm.
or that or major rebuild.
But I think Greg is trying to talk about the fact that none of this money goes to pay for grade separation.
Oh,
I
that's-
don't want anyone who's reading this report to think, oh, we passed major RR, now we have all the money we
Yeah,
need to build whatever
besides
grade
this-
separation we
the
want.
scale's all wrong anyway.
Right. How about the impacts of this dedicated funding and the changes that might come from member agencies and the previous funding commitments remain to be seen. The amount of money available from Measure RR is dwarfed by the need to fund grade separations, or what's the best way to say it?
Could not possibly fund grade separations.
Yeah.
Could not possibly.
Now, that may be a value judgment, but I think it's a fair one.
Yeah.
I would say is insufficient as opposed to could not possibly, because it could not possibly sounds like it could be a rule as opposed to amount.
Yes.
Yeah, Keith's right. Keith's absolutely
Yeah.
right about that.
Also, it might be used to retire the debt.
How's that? The amount of money available for Measure RR would be insufficient to cover the cost of grade separations.
I would say the construction costs, because it might be used later for paying the debt. Paying,
I'm not sure what you mean.
say we have to borrow $50 million and the debt on it is $5 million.
Right, but it's still insufficient to cover the cost entirely.
Construction costs, yeah.
Oh, all of the costs entirely. I mean, there's just not going to be any leftover money from this to sufficiently cover all of this. That's what we're saying.
What I would say is the amount of money available from Measure RR seems likely to be dedicated almost exclusively to operation and is unlikely to.
Yeah, yeah, that works.
And would leave and would be unlikely to, it would be unlikely to have any left over to cover the cost of.
Yeah, and would likely not have. How's that?
Yeah, that's better.
It'd be funds rather than funding. But
Sure. Okay. Okay.
So the very next paragraph where
Yep.
where we talk about COVID impact,
Yep.
that second paragraph needs to be revised in light of the Measure RR. So I think what's important to say is that it's the immediate future of Caltrain's ridership is uncertain. But funding is not highly uncertain at this point because of Measure RR.
Sorry, Phil, which I have as discussed in Chapter 1, Caltrain has suffered a significant drop in ridership as a result of COVID. However, the passage of Measure R, despite these ridership impacts and the pandemic, shows a significant vote of support from the electorate, which I think is a fair statement. Does anyone have any?
But that last sentence, what would the investment be? That just doesn't follow. I mean, what federal funding are you talking about federal operating funding?
I just mean that if Caltrain had to make the case to the feds that they should be, they would make it an attractive investment. The fact that Californians voted to fund Caltrain despite the situation.
But are we talking about capital investment or are we talking about operational support?
I think there's significant community support.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm trying to figure out what these two paragraphs are trying to say together.
What I'm trying to say is, in a pandemic where ridership has plummeted 97%, and the voters voted overwhelmingly to continue to fund Caltrain operations despite that, which
Okay.
says that the electorate is betting, and maybe some background would be helpful here, and then you can help me think about what the right language is.
Okay.
High-speed rail was able to get federal money, stimulus money, because they went to the feds and said, hey, we passed Prop 1A. We have $9 billion. If you give us some of your money, we'll match it dollar for dollar, and
Okay,
we'll
but
invest.
I think we're mixing things up here. So if we take that first sentence, that works very well. And then if you incorporated some revised version of this, so that sentence works. I mean, sorry, that second sentence works very well. And then that last sentence, I just don't see how it follows, because we're not clear about what kind of funding Caltrain might be looking for. On the other hand,
let me try a sentence. I would say this demonstration of community support would be very helpful,
I'm going to add likely.
or would likely be helpful in attracting federal funds if they should become available.
are we talking about grade SEP funds? Are we talking about
All
operating?
of it. It's both.
Oh,
Okay,
Just in general, it's community support for our train.
okay.
period.
Now that's that second paragraph. The important point about the second paragraph is the immediate ridership numbers are uncertain,
Sure.
but
Okay.
the rest of it is just not necessary.
Right.
Yeah. So the immediate future of Caltrain's ridership is uncertain.
Take out the funding, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, not just say the immediate future of Caltrain's ridership remains highly uncertain.
Okay.
What does immediate mean?
I mean, I think it's in the eye of the beholder. What we're saying is people are probably not necessarily going to come running back right now.
Yeah, although there was that Caltrain ridership survey that I cited that said, that you could go back to Nadia. I know I put that in chapter 1 when I revised it. So it's in there somewhere. So maybe it needs to be brought up here.
Okay. Let me see if I can find it in the chapter 1 that you sent.
Yeah, so the footnotes will have, or the end notes will have it, that side. We have to find the place where that footnote applies.
Okay. I think this is the line. Hold on. I think I found it, but I don't see what it's referencing here. I'll put a note in here and I'll go back and find it, Phil.
All right. Yeah, so there was a general, one of the first paragraphs I wrote had to do with the basic economic drivers, and I added the Caltrain ridership survey to that original paragraph that I had written earlier. But if I remember correctly, that survey didn't have a time frame as to when riders would return, just that they would.
Yeah. I mean, I just think immediate future is fair given what we know.
Yeah. Near term, immediate, pick your term.
Yep. Okay.
So Nadia, if you don't mind, I'd like to take you back to page 2.
Sure.
So under eminent domain,
Yep.
in the second paragraph,
Yep.
the last sentence refers to property owners. You see, that should be
Rights. Yeah.
rights. And also owners should be S apostrophe.
Thank you.
Okay, that's just good grammar hygiene.
No, yeah, that's great. I appreciate your grammar hygiene. Anything else?
I think the section on freight needs to be tightened up, but that's like, I don't know if anybody has the stomach to go through more discussion on that now.
Sure,
I think
we
it can be condensed considerably.
Well, so first paragraph is the role of freight in moving stuff around, and that Union Pacific carries that on diesel trains that will not be electrified.
Yeah, even after Caltrain is electrified, diesel freight trains will still be hauled by diesel locomotives.
Okay. So it carries, yeah.
Even after Caltrain's electrified.
Keep going, just dictate.
Diesel trains, freight trains will still be hauled by diesel locomotives.
Okay.
Now, that next sentence where you talk about the Mission Bay hauler, a turn running from one, did you get that from some railroad stores?
Yes.
Because I don't think that anybody else besides me, and I'm not trying to be brag here, but I don't think anybody else besides me knows what a turn is in railroad operations parlance.
I think everybody could figure out how a chain turns around. I don't think
No. Let me explain. A turn is when you have a short freight run that goes from here and back.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're physically turning the train.
Well, in this case, it means both, but yes.
It means a local freight operation, which is why, by the way, why Union Pacific wants to turn this over to a short line operator.
Okay, suggestions on editing it so that it's not train wonky?
It would be a, let me think if I want to say, it's a local freight train as opposed to a long distance train originating in Warm Springs. And now the rest of it's fine.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm not sure that you need to add Mission Bay Hall. You can just say runs nightly as a local freight.
Sure.
Because otherwise Mission Bay Hall makes you think, who is that, a company or what?
Sure.
Okay.
Does anybody care who the customers were? Did you guys find that additive? Too much TMI, as they say, too much information, or?
Well,
I think so.
It's important to understand why these freights run.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to make okay.
They're not
Because
serving
people-
Palo Alto, not
Right,
any longer.
Right, because people again are going to, well, why don't we just get rid of them?
Right.
Right,
I
so
did
I think
include
that
in
I have-
here, I mean, I had a line in here about what they're hauling, because they're hauling gravel and they're hauling dirty dirt is what they call it, basically excavated dirt from projects in San Francisco and other places, but I took all that out. Okay, next paragraph. Caltrain owns the right of way in Palo Alto.
But has several, not a several. During night, and the first sentence is during overnight operations.
Travel
in the corridor.
Well, we already said that above, right?
Or okay.
3 times at night. And technically, they actually have special permission to run like one train before. They're really supposed to run between 12 and 6, and they have one that runs at like 11 something, I think.
Yeah, but yeah, and this, by the way, this agreement is legally binding.
Yeah, but I think that agreement kind of implicates that, right? Okay. I think that's a fair sentence, right? It's
Do you
less
know
than
the
5.
duration of this agreement?
Well, it's actually several different agreements. I think there's actually like 9 of them, and they have been renegotiated over time. So there was the original 1991 trackage rights agreement. So the short answer is it's not just one agreement. There's lots of them. And I actually linked to the page, the Caltrain website page, where you could go and read all of them. That's what that footnote is. Keith, you can't actually see the screen while we're doing this, can you?
Yeah, I can see the screen.
Oh, you can? Okay, all right.
Yeah, I've got oodles of monitors. I just have no camera.
We just can't see you. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one is talks about freight is less than 5% of operations, but has impacts on design flexibility.
Can I go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I guess the issue with a reader here is freight a long-term companion, or is there prospect of it disappearing?
Well,
And
Dina
like,
would argue strongly if she were here that is a lot of political speculation. And so I'm just leaving the main facts of this is what it does. The fact that there is conversations about a short line operator, which would potentially offer us design flexibility, and that there was a letter from the mayors of San Francisco and San Jose talking about the importance of loosening that flexibility to improve grade set designs. And I kept it at just that.
Yeah.
Because it would be a rabbit hole otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, the rabbit hole is that the railroads in general are trying to shed branch lines to short line operators. And there are some entire companies who do nothing but operate little branch lines all over the country that aren't even connected to each other, just a common corporate ownership.
And to pull the lens back even higher, I would say that part of this is just a matter of the time in which you're reading this. So pre-COVID, I might have been more bullish on the idea that the state, as part of their California State Rail Plan, might buy out operations on the peninsula to be able to expand Caltrain quickly. But given the global pandemic and where funding has just gone and what it just did to the state budget, I'm now much less bullish on that possibility.
Yeah. Besides, I imagine the environmental impact would be huge, particularly on the highway. Well, on the highways, of course.
If you buy a fleet of electric trucks and it's not that many loads, it's kind of it's up for grabs.
It's the kind of load that would beat the pavement to pieces.
Yeah.
And Caltrans might be opposed to that.
Yeah, agreed.
Reason.
It's complicated, which is why I took it all out.
Yeah, that is a deep rabbit hole.
Yeah. I mean, ideally you say something about it, but it sounds like it's not easy to describe. So
no, and I thought it would add more. It would just made us add more paragraphs rather than take away.
Yeah. Okay.
It certainly wouldn't clarify city council's decision making.
Yeah.
My comment was about how we're framing this chapter. Are we still calling it community context?
Yeah, and maybe community is the wrong word. I was just trying to come up with the context in which we're discussing all this stuff. And since Tony mentioned before, we didn't really talk about community like leaves and trees and bikes, then maybe community context is the wrong title.
Yeah, I've been kind of chewing on that during the course of this discussion, and I'm wondering if a lot of what you're describing here is external factors. The only thing that really is local is the council section about the eminent domain.
Mm-hmm.
And just wondering if that would help us frame it better, because we do want to have, like, I think a lot of our other discussions are really providing the community aspect, right? We're talking about the concerns that the community are bringing up about each choice. So structurally, that's just one thing I want to get in here, because I know we're running out of time, but I wonder if this is like really focused on external factors, all the funding sources and the different people that are dependent on the tracks. And then maybe that would make some of the internal discussion, maybe that should go to another section, or I don't know. I think if I'm looking at what brings all these together, it looks like external stuff except for the one part.
So I think the easiest thing to not mess with the structure so much, unless we really feel like we need to, is to just change the word community context to something, or the words community context to something else. If anyone has a suggestion.
I agree with Carrie. I think if we can take off the word community, it's the overall context that we're working under, but it's not community.
Sure. Is there something else that describes what this is? Just kind of, if you're flipping through this report and you saw that chapter, you'd want
stakeholders. I'm sorry, it's kind of a nerdy project management term, but it's kind of like.
Well, I feel like we're not talking about. There's a lot of other stakeholders, and we don't have them in this necessarily.
Okay.
So, I liked the word framework, but I'm trying to think of like what is the way that describes this framework, right? Maybe decision framework, or it's not really, our decision is not really framed in this, but community framework or
How about factors influencing decision on Ray?
sure. Say that one more time, Larry, so I can.
Factors influencing decision, Ray, great section.
Influencing. It's not even decisions, right? Because we're not really, this isn't.
How about influencing factors?
Sure. That seems to work.
Yeah, that seems to better set you up for what you're reading with this
Yep,
content.
I totally agree. Thank you for that. Great
Thanks.
addition. Okay, going back to the freight section that Phil wanted to tighten up. So here we talk about they are less than 5% of operations, but impact design flexibility. We talk about traveling at different slopes. Whatever graphic you guys can come up with, we might be able to tighten this language once we get a better graphic. So no pressure, but
Nadia, the graphic is going to look really flat. I mean, a 1% slope is very flat.
okay, but this is where you have to resist your innermost architect and not draw even to scale. Be artistic, because I agree with you. Yeah.
I just sent you a exhibit. Take a look at it. See maybe that works with the Caltrain.
Okay,
on the graphic.
great. Thank you. Yeah, anything we can do to make this better. But Tony, yeah, I don't want to. We can put this is not drawn to scale, but feel free to kind of use. I mean, what I'm really trying to express is the distance, right? If you have a grade separation that runs, you know, 3,000 feet and you change the grade, it's now 1,500 feet. That's what I want to explain. And so just explaining that and however you think is the best way visually. And we can edit this text to match whatever picture you come up with, right?
Okay.
Nadia, check it in your email. You might like what I have sent because I already did.
Okay, great. Hold on, because that requires me futzing with my windows, which I'm not great at, while also being on this. Hold on. Okay, in the meantime, anything else? Okay, let me see if I can share my screen to this. Hold on, stop sharing. And then let me pull this on to a, well, you know what, we'll do this afterwards. It's gonna be easier. It's let's just keep on going with this. But thank you, Ripon, that might be helpful. I'll send that to Tony. Okay, let me go back to this.
So I had one suggestion. I think it's a different in a different section of this report. It's about the funding sources.
Okay.
And there was a consultant that the city had hired when we were the CAP that talked about funding sources.
Oh yeah, so maybe you missed the part where Greg was asking about that, and I went back and looked at the chart, and the problem was that there were some things that were helpful in there, and there were some things that were a big cause of a lot of comments because he had confused available funding sources with available with debt, the debt that you could take on, and didn't really explain the amount of debt you would need to be able to even apply for some of those things. And so the graphics that they had were not really usable. But I'm happy to, if anyone's interested, I'm happy to send you the copies of those presentations so you can revisit them and you'll see why I didn't think that those graphics helped. And frankly, some of it was more loaded. Like there was more of a reliance on talking about things like the business tax. And I wanted to stay away from that in our report to be more neutral. So the point of this section again was just to describe that from when Caltrain started, there was a fad for federal funding for a while. Then there was a fad of county funding. And now we're getting into this new paradigm where Caltrain has to figure out how to fund all the remaining grade separations for their own operations rather than it being a city-driven process. And so that's kind of the theme of the funding of grade separations and not necessarily all the different funding sources.
Should we say that somewhere?
That's in there.
Okay.
So here's all the different funding possibilities. We added the Melrose district and the other things, but then hold on, somewhere in here. Historic funding sources, right? It went from 1935 to 1941 where it was federal. Then in the 90s, it was mostly funded through county measures. And then now this is where we are today. And that you know, the way that we fund things is going to have to change. So hopefully that covers it.
Yep.
Here, I have this in bold.
Yeah.
Okay. I will clean this up and send this back out. Before we break, we just need to clarify when we want to have our next meeting. So it sounds like very reluctantly, the next meeting will probably be that Monday of the week of Thanksgiving. And because that's what gives enough time for people to be able to write, basically. Do we feel like we'd have enough availability for people to write and then also send it to another group and give that group time to edit? I recognize that maybe for the South Palo Alto, for Greg and Keith, that might not be possible. But for the other two groups, do you think you guys?
In 2 weeks, it might be possible. On the calendar, it says we have a meeting next Wednesday.
And that's what I'm saying. We wouldn't have that meeting because nobody's going to be able to turn, you'd have to have everything in 2 days. Not happening, right?
So have we decided who's on which team of two? Or are we going to decide that now?
Well, what I proposed in the outline is what we went with. Hold on, let me see
All
if
right.
I can pull up my outline. Phil, you do
One
not have a
question.
group. Yep.
I know in general we try and get things 3 days ahead of time, but you're not required. You can do at places memos. And can we do a dump the morning of?
I think the problem is that we have to give the public a chance to be able to read that stuff. And so, no, we have to give it's Brown Acted information, right?
Well, I mean, I think the 3 days is not mandatory. I think it's preferred. So the
Philip,
question,
can you chime in?
I think Keith is right. We can have additions at the up to the council does that all the time.
So yes, that's correct. Although I think we'd have to follow up because just out of courtesy, when it's a longer document, we really try not to do that. So I think we'll have to follow up and let you know whether that's reasonable. I know noting that this is not something totally new, but it is edited.
yeah, but I mean, like last night's council meeting, they dumped a 24-page memo in the afternoon. So
yeah.
I mean, sometimes it happens. And
Yep,
is
sometimes
this
it
an
happens.
exception? We've been following the spirit of the law pretty well. Is this an exception where we think it might be useful to have a meeting a week from today and do a dump? It doesn't have to be that afternoon, but maybe we try to do a dump Tuesday night.
Sarah, if you're still on the line, do you think you could check in with Tim about this?
I don't think I see her.
Sure.
Oh, she is. Okay.
She's just hidden. Thank you.
Sorry, check in with
Yeah, I'll
just
follow
about
up with
whether
you.
more than 24 hours is needed.
Yeah, whether we can just provide the attachments on the day. I think that previously they told us that was actually allowed.
So if it would be Monday the 23rd, that would be a special meeting. And then Brown Act is 24 hours in advance.
So you would have to have it Friday morning, right?
I think what we're trying to find out, Sarah, if you could check with Tim, is whether we could actually provide it on the day of the meeting, which does sometimes happen with App Places memo.
Okay. And Keith, were you talking about the 23rd or the 18th?
23rd.
Let's see.
Or we could do the 18th. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if you did the 18th and then try to dump it before we went home on Tuesday. There
is going to be a meeting on Wednesday the 18th, right?
Well, that's what we're debating. So if we can dump it at places on the 18th, we could have a meeting next week if people feel like they can write that fast, if we give you an entire week. I will say for the members following along, it will be a dump of information, but there will still be multiple, we're going to go back and forth on these chapters for a few more turns. So we could still take public comment on those. Those can continue to roll in. So I don't want folks to feel like they're not getting to see it. I mean, there will be a chance to add comments, right? So if the group feels like they can turn something around by the 18th, and this is entirely driven by your own personal schedule. So chime in here with what you think is feasible given your own personal life right now.
Well, the fact that we're going to be losing at least three people over that Thanksgiving week makes me think that we should try to shoot for next Wednesday.
Yeah.
The question is can we get something that's useful by then? And I don't think we can get it by this Thursday. We have to have the weekend to work, which means can we turn it on Monday or Tuesday?
Right.
And are we going to be going over every single chapter next time? Maybe we can be specific about what's on the agenda.
So I do believe that we can provide it on the day, but we'll follow up and confirm that.
My suggestion would be if specifically if Carrie and Tony think that they can be done in time to be able to review next meeting, then that we could start with discarded alternatives in Churchill, because I think those will be faster than South Palo Alto. And it's more likely that Keith and Greg will need the most time because they're writing about more alternatives. So that
Yeah,
would be,
what about 4, 5, and 6?
What do you mean 4, 5, and 6?
What do we have to go in order? Because are 4, 5, and 6 ready?
Well, chapter 4, we've already given feedback on safety. We could certainly discuss chapter 4 instead if you guys wanted.
I'm just thinking about if we're talking about new content versus existing content. That's really where I was going.
Well,
I can do either way.
Sure, we could do either. That's a good point. Well, we could review chapter, but I feel like I don't know if you guys have. I think Greg, Phil, Larry, and myself have already given feedback on chapter 6. I'm not sure it's worth a meeting, frankly. I think everyone can review chapter 6 on their own because it's really the safety one. And the latest changes that I made to Greg's version is, to put it very briefly, hey, council, we have a bunch of suggestions for your future work about safety. You should read this. And that's basically the bulk of the chapter. So I don't really think we need a meeting about that one. Chapter 5 is the conclusion, which Larry and I have not written because it'll depend on what everything else is. And chapter 6 is the appendix, which is basically in progress. I mean, anyone sending something to the appendix is kind of writing about it in their report, and that'll be a kind of a collation of the end. So really, our focus is chapter 3, which is a monster chapter. And then it's a matter of who can be done faster. And if there's one group that thinks they can be, like if Dave and In-Young think that they can be done first because they know their Churchill thing and it can be faster and they can work really efficiently, then that could be the focus of the next meeting on Wednesday, the 18th.
As for discarded alternatives, I would need to hear from Tony. I'm pretty flexible. It's up to Tony.
So Carrie, I will email you.
Okay.
And sort of get an outline of what you think the idea is about methodology.
Well, so I have the discarded alternatives is really just summarizing that the citywide tunnel was eliminated before XCAP. Like we didn't get a chance to consider that. And so it's kind of just cataloging that. And then that the simple underpass, and I can help you with the simple underpass because it's partly covered, Carrie, in the underpass section that we wrote, but it's just that was reviewed in 2014 and discarded because it had property impacts. And so it might be a question of moving what we did in the underpass section, part of it into here. And then the closure of Meadow is simply writing the part of the traffic report that says that they studied whether Meadow could be closed and they determined it could not be. So to be honest, this is a pretty fast section. And so if possible, I'd like to see if we might be able to get Churchill and that section done in the next meeting.
Okay, and I thought Carrie and I were also working on methods. Is that true?
No, you guys are working on
discarded.
Yeah, it's an amalgamation of 2, 4, and 5. So 2 and 4 were already done, and you're pulling out anything that relates to discarded methods and putting it together here.
And that's with Dave and Tony?
You're looking at the old chapter 2,
Yeah.
Tony, and that's already been written, and there's versions of that are available.
Yes, I see that.
Yeah, so you can look at those and include whatever you need for your section, but I don't think for your section, which was now discarded alternatives, that those are going to be very useful.
I'm not getting it, Nadia. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So we're changing the order. of the chapters. So these were our old chapters. Methods used to evaluate alternatives, which if you got a chance to look at that chapter, it's basically describing these are all the alternatives we used. We got rid of some alternatives. We heard some new alternatives. That's already been kind of written. And so
Okay.
when you guys are in the new chapter 2, in the new chapter 3, which you would be working with Carrie on discarded alternatives. I'm just going to scroll to here. So discarded alternatives, you have to write about the fact that the citywide tunnel was thrown out before XCAP got a chance to look at it. And this
Okay.
was the vote, right? The simple underpass from 2014, this is from 2014, that Hatch-Mott did was rejected because there was a lot of property impacts. And the closure of Meadow, according to the Hexagon study, is not possible.
Okay.
Okay.
It seems pretty simple. Just
Yeah, so I'm
2
hoping,
paragraphs.
yeah. So I was hoping that that was something that we could, if we can turn that all around, then we can have a meeting next week on the 18th. And if we can have something at places, then we can have it ready for that morning so that Sarah could give it to us in time for the meeting. Does that
All right.
work for everybody?
Yep.
And then that way we could skip the meeting on the week of Thanksgiving and then instead have a meeting on December 2nd.
What time are we meeting on next Wednesday?
Next Wednesday there's a PTC meeting. Yes, Carrie?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's 3:30 to 6. If it's possible for us to push it to 3, that would give us the full 3 hours, or we could go 3:30 to 6:30, understanding that Carrie might have to leave, but we could finish editing.
That's okay with me. I mean, it's up to you guys. I definitely do have to leave at 6.
Yeah.
5:50.
So does the group prefer going 3:30 to 6:30, or do you want to move it 3 to 6?
I'm totally flexible.
Me too.
Okay. So
3:30 is easier.
3:30 is easier. Okay.
Yeah.
Me too.
Me,
All right. So let's.
some days 3 o'clock is fine. Some days they aren't. It's hard to predict without a crystal ball. So
Okay. So let's say it's 3:30 to 6:30 with the understanding that Carrie will leave at 6. And Carrie, if you have any edits, you can always give them to me after online.
Yep.
Offline, I mean. Mixing up my metaphors here. Okay, so that would we won't need something for Thanksgiving, and so instead we can do something on the 2nd. Does that work
Okay.
for everybody?
Yep.
Okay, great. And if anybody has any questions, you guys can call me offline and I can walk you through other stuff. But
Okay.
I want to let us adjourn because it's already 7:05 and we've gone over. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye all.
Thanks. Bye.
Hi.